All right, welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube channel. I am A's Philosophy, and tonight we are going to see. All right, welcome to the A's Philosophy YouTube. We can get a discussion going. It's going to be pretty wide open. Uh, Basically, almost anything is on the table. I guess it will kind of depend on who joins and what they want to talk about, if anything. If no one joins, then I can kind of just discuss some things that I feel are important to me. And I will do that a little bit in the beginning. Uh, but if people are basically looking to join, then I can pretty much just be quiet and go into the conversation. But these are the kind of things that I was thinking about today as topics. We have theism versus atheism, just basically as general as you can possibly get. We have the evolution, intelligent design. Oh, I thought that versus. Oh, that's not. I need to fix that. That's silly. Let's see if I can fix this real fast. Sorry about that. There we go. Let's see if we got that now. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, I had a little mess up there, a little typo, but got it right, I think, now. Not surprised since I just kind of typed this up in like 2 seconds. But anyways, the idea of Christian ethics versus secular human ethics, which is more moral, which is a better foundation for morality. Some people are discussing that out there. Or we can go back to our old topic of Christian doctrine, which is something we discussed quite a bit. If there are Christians out there who want to discuss basically some of the more important aspects of what constitutes Christian doctrine, approach to the Bible, salvation, the idea of works righteousness versus sola fide, the Bible, how to approach that, its truth, either from internally from a Christian perspective or from a skeptical standpoint. Either way, and the idea of presuppositionalism versus evidentialism. I am on the side of the evidentialists. I think presuppositionalism is silly. It's destructive to the faith. It's circular. It's a bad idea. It doesn't really support God. The transcendental argument for God doesn't work. There are a lot of problems with it. Obviously, I believe in God, but I think there are bad arguments for God, and the transcendental argument and presuppositionalism are a couple of them that I think just are. I see them as false. Something that I'll say, and I released a video recently, so let's go take a look at my channel real fast just to give some updates. And I will post the link to the StreamYard in a little bit. But first, I want to go over some things, some updates. Basically, I want people to be aware that on my channel recently, I released a video. I haven't done many videos. My last video before this one was over a year ago. But I think I started trying to gain more just uploading videos as opposed to doing YouTube. Live streams, because I want people to have a mix of content. But I released this video a couple days ago. Did mitochondria originally exist as independent organisms? And what motivated me to do that was actually a conversation I had on my channel a week or two ago about evolution that was hosted. And we can go back and watch that. I thought it was a pretty good conversation. And one of the kind of more peripheral points that was brought up was whether mitochondria originally existed as independent organisms. And I thought this was a really interesting point. It's not the first time I've obviously heard the claim, but and I heard it before, and I had done a little research into it, but not to such a depth as I did for the production of this video. I also wrote a Substack article about this. So if you go to my channel, you go to home. You have the home, you have the videos, you have live. You can see my Substack is linked on at the top of my YouTube channel. Click on that, go to my Substack. It takes you to this first page. I just click no thanks. And I have here my Substack article about did mitochondria originally exist as independent organisms? And I think I'm not going to read it here because I don't want to bore everyone. Not that it's boring, but I'm just going to get rid of that. It's kind of a longer article, so I don't want to spend too much time. But I think I do a pretty good job of disproving the idea, maybe not disproving the idea that mitochondria were originally independent organisms, because it's kind of impossible to prove that they were, because the evolutionists can make up whatever story they want about what happened billions of years ago, and you can't really falsify it. But you can look at what is the evidence that's currently available and ask questions about whether their ideas are feasible, and or if there's any reason to suppose that perhaps this might have been a possibility. And I think I basically did a really good job of showing that, as far as the evidence currently stands, no, there's no good reason to think mitochondria. Well, they're certainly not independently existing organisms. I don't think anyone's denied that, but there's no reason to think they ever were. And a lot of it's based on basically a theory or hypothesis that was basically popularized in the 1970s. I go into this in the article itself on my Substack. And again, this was also the first Substack I had written in quite some time. I really had planned on using my Substack more than I do, so maybe I will get back into that at some point. Maybe now, maybe this, because one of the big problems I had with Substack was the formatting, and it took me so long to figure. It sounds like a silly thing, but getting the formatting and learning how to use it at a basic level was kind of a little bit of a learning curve. But doing this article actually kind of got me back into it. I was able to learn some things and it got a little bit easier as I was working on it. But basically, there's this idea called the endosymbiotic hypothesis, which is the idea that some of the organelles that are found in modern cells were originally independently existing organisms. One of those is obviously mitochondria. And I go into why they think that. Basically, the mitochondria have their own little DNA in there, and a couple other unique characteristics to that organelle. They have their own transcription system as well. And this is all fascinating. It's interesting. I can see why someone at a very surface level would think that maybe that would indicate that perhaps they could be independently living organisms, or maybe perhaps at one point. But I think in the evidence that I generated, it just shows that there's really no possibility of that, because they're so completely dependent on the host cells. And by the way, the host cells is a term that comes from, they're really not hosts. The idea of the cell being a host for the mitochondria comes from the theory itself. It's really not based on any sort of empirical justification. And I think this is pretty important, because I think that refuting the endosymbiotic theory actually goes a long way to refuting evolution itself, because eukaryotes are basically the more complex organisms. They have, some of them are unicellular, but a lot of eukaryotes are multicellular. Prokaryotes are all unicellular organisms, but eukaryotes, there's a wide variety of them. And one thing that's universal about eukaryotes is that they have a cell nucleus, and also they all have mitochondria, except there's one type of eukaryote that doesn't have a mitochondria. That doesn't have mitochondria, and they just found it within the last decade. But anyways, the organisms that do have mitochondria rely on them. They can't go without them. So I don't know. It's never been observed that the organisms that use them were ever in such a state that they didn't need them. So I think, to me, the mitochondria are necessary, and I basically demonstrate very clearly that mitochondria cannot exist independently of the cell on their own. It's just not possible, because of a number of factors I go into in the article. And I disprove endosymbiotic theory, which is a dominant theory in evolution, and biology in general. So I'm going to be waiting for the Nobel Prize to send me my prize for basically demonstrating a major hypothesis to be false. I'm waiting for it. They always say that, if you refute evolution, then the Nobel Prize will contact you and send you a prize. So here I've done it, and I'm going to be waiting for my prize from the Nobel Committee. So just waiting for them to review my work and contact me and send me that prize. Can't wait. But anyways, go read that for those of you who are interested in the creation evolution debate. And okay, so that's that. But we'll go back to my YouTube channel. And yeah, a lot of good discussions coming up lately. So maybe we'll get one today. I will post the link for people who want to join. Let me get back to something here. Oops, what did I just do? Okay, that worked actually. So I'm going to pin the link. Anyone can join. Or if no one joins, I will probably go on a discourse about Christian doctrine, uh, which is something we've discussed many times on this channel, but I'm still seeing obviously a lot of issues out there with how it's being presented. Yeah. Okay. So there it is. The link is pinned if anyone wants to join. We can talk about any of these topics, theism versus atheism, or we can talk about, either all of them at once and kind of just have a free flowing dialogue or pick one and go for one. Um, be cool if a presuppositionalist would join my discussion. We could kind of discuss about that. I'm not sure if there are any presups who watch my channel. I've interacted with them a number of times, and I've invited them to my channel. So if there's a Christian presuppositionalist who wants to go into that discussion, I've never really gone into that in depth in my channel. I mean, I understand it. I feel like I understand the arguments pretty well, but I've never really had a chance to really engage on my own channel with one of them, even though I have interacted with them. Or if an atheist wants to join and talk about why he or she thinks atheism is a better idea than theism, people who believe in evolution want to talk about that. I am a proponent of intelligent design. I think it makes way more sense based on the evidence. I think there are a lot of problems with evolution. You can ask me why I think that. Christian ethics versus secular humanism. Which is the better foundation of ethics? Christian doctrine, which is kind of like probably the area I know the most about. I could have thrown the Trinity in there. Works righteousness versus sola fide. Any of that. So we'll see if anyone wants to join. I'm not seeing anyone right now, so I'm just gonna chill out for a bit. See if we can get someone. What I will probably do is I'll look for something in the Bible, and we can talk about that. Give me 1 second. Right, biblical topic. Let's see. Sorry, I'm looking up. Hmm. Maybe we can review a debate too. I've seen a number of good debates recently. This is a decent article. We'll go to a debate. So I've seen some good ones recently. I watch a lot of debates about a whole wide range of topics. Debates between Christians about what is true to Christian doctrine. I also watch debates about uh, the skeptics versus Christianity and things like that. Christianity.com. What is justification and what does it mean to be justified by faith? Justification is not just a message of the Protestant Reformation. Is a foundationally Christian message about how we are saved by Jesus. What is an interesting topic? As defined by Baker's Biblical Dictionary, justification is the declaring of a person to be just or righteous. It is a legal term signifying acquittal, a fact that makes it unpalatable to many in our day. We tend to distrust legalism, and thus we dismiss anything that savors of a legalistic approach. We should be clear that our hesitation was not shared by biblical writers. What is justification in their day is axiomatic that a wealthy and important citizen would not be treated in a law court in the same way as an insignificant person. Indeed, this was sometimes written into the statutes, and for example, in the ancient code of Hammurabi is laid down that if a citizen knocked out the tooth of no citizen's own tooth would be knocked out. So some people have alleged that, I guess that is where the Exodus gets tooth for a tooth, eye for an eye. But if the victim was a vassal, it's sufficient to pay a small fine. Nobody expected strict justice in human courts. All right. In the book on Christian Religion, Dr. Charles Stanley explains the meaning of justification as used in Romans 5:1. He explains, so Dr. Charles Stanley is no longer among us. I think he died somewhat recently in the last few months. Once and for all transaction. Oh, here we go. Justification as used in Romans 5:1. So right away, I think it's really interesting that people look at Romans for the definition of justification instead of looking at the words of Christ himself. This is, again, something that always strikes me whenever I just see these. I don't know if a lot of people notice that, but for me, I constantly notice how when people are looking for Christian doctrine, to whom are they actually looking? They'll say that all the Bible is it's all the same. Actually, I'm not sure I agree with that. For me, as a Christian, I really wish Christians would get more into the practice of basing their doctrine off of the teachings of Christ, and which is really the reason Christ is important because he perfectly revealed the will of God. So anything the prophets say, "Thus says the Lord," is all the same. But when you get to the epistles in the New Testament, do we have that same level of authority? I would say no, actually. And if anyone wants to argue that, then feel free to do so. The Greek verb tense used in this verse means once and for all transaction. We have been justified as declared not guilty once and for all. The word justify is not only a theological term, but is a judicial or legal term as well. As far as back as the book of Genesis, the question was, shall not the judge of the earth deal justly? If we accept the Lord Jesus who died in our place, we are justified at peace, spared from the penalty. So if we accept the Lord Jesus who died in our place, there's a typo there as well, we are justified at peace, spared from the penalty. So is that really what Jesus taught? That if we just accept that he died in our place, that we will be spared the penalty? Is it really that simple? So in Matthew 5, it says here, the NASB at least, and pretty good translation. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So the question becomes, what does it mean to be righteous? Does it mean just believing in Jesus Christ? And the answer is no, because right here in the preceding verses, Jesus talks about how you have to obey the law of God, and the law of God is not going to pass away. And you can't annul any of the commandments of God. So Jesus is clearly tying the obedience to God's law to the entering of the kingdom of heaven. Now, there are those today who are trying to make the case that they're Christians, so-called, but they're trying to get around this by saying that the kingdom of heaven actually doesn't mean heaven. As shocking as that sounds, it actually means like 1,000-year millennial reign in the book of Revelation, which is really an unsupportable viewpoint. They are eventually going to have to walk that back because they realize that you can't have this kind of, where was the Where's the other one? Oh, okay. Let's see if I can't. There we go. So they're realizing. I think the sola fide people are realizing, or some of them are at least, that you can't get around this language. You can't. Jesus can't be demanding people be righteous, and then at the same time you allege that all you have to do is believe some facts about that Jesus died for your sins, and then you go to heaven. That's what it says right here. If we accept the Lord Jesus who died in our place, we are justified at peace, spared from the penalty. In my opinion, this is a really dangerous idea. Hello, Ace Philosophy. Hello, brother. I hope you are and everyone in the chat is doing well today. Objective Ethics. Yeah, good to see you. If you want to join, you're absolutely welcome. No one else is joining, so if you want to have a discussion, Objective, feel free to click the link and hop in. Because I've been live for 20 minutes now, and no one else is down for the struggle. So if you have something you want to talk about, or if you just want to give us an update on your recovery, is something else I'm interested in hearing about. I hope you're doing well. Um, but I know that these things are uncertain, so you don't have to talk about that if you don't want. I understand it's difficult. But anyways, I'll continue with my discourse. Yeah, again, anyone's welcome to join this point. It's an open discussion. So, and also, if you join, you can guide the conversation wherever you like. You can ask questions of me if you feel like I'm someone whose ideas are worth listening to and understanding, or you can try to promote an idea that you think is important, and I can kind of respond to it as necessary. Um, but I want to. Okay. Sure, I'm happy to join. Let's wait a few minutes if anyone. Well, like I said, I've already been live for 20 minutes now. So the fact that no one else has joined tells me they probably aren't going to. So don't feel the need to wait any longer than you want to. Just putting that out there. If other people haven't joined, that's their problem. But if you want to join, go ahead. And if you don't want to join, you don't have to. I'm just throwing it out there as an option. The Bible teaches it. However, to the man who does not work, but trust God who justifies the wicked, his faith is credited as righteousness. Certainly, justification can be preached incorrectly. That is, without properly emphasizing the fact that the fruit of the Spirit must also come because of justification. Jonathan Edwards called this evangelical obedience. So, what is it? So this is something I disagree with, and I agree with the people who say that just because you believe some facts, you're not going to bear fruit because you believe some. I just got the notification, even though I had it set. Maybe others are just now. Okay, yeah, up to you. It's up to you on your own time. And again, whoever, if anyone joins, they don't have to talk about what I'm talking. I'm just talking about this right now because it's something I found that is interesting, and I want people to basically hear it while we're waiting for someone else to join. If you believe that Jesus Christ died for your sins, is that actually going to result in you being a better person? I'm just working and saw you were live. I was going to watch something on Hinduism. Yeah, also, Taurus, you're welcome to join as well. This is an open discussion. So, if you want to join, and I know we've been kind of going back and forth recently, if you want to join and kind of talk about some of the things you've seen on my channel, I know you said you're Catholic, so that could probably be an interesting conversation about like uh, your, first of all, like your views on things, and if you feel like you want to understand where I'm coming from, we can have that discussion now. I would like to. Yeah, if you well, the link is pinned. So go ahead. The children are a little wild. Okay, yeah, they'll do that. If you think Jesus died for your sins and provides zero incentive to be a good person, and it provides yeah, exactly. Dirty varmint with a home run here. That's why I think. That's why I think that the idea of Jesus being an atonement for sins is actually a pretty dangerous idea, and I think it leads to a lot of harm in society. Um, and I agree with Dirty Varm here. I think that it leads to basically the same kind of moral relativism that you find in atheism, and I think that's probably why a lot of Christians they don't demonstrate a righteousness in this world that's much better than the secular society around them. Some of them do, but I think when whatever if I think that they basically come at the end of the day, their moral foundation is no different from atheism. It's relativistic because in atheism, I'm not being critical of atheists, and I know objective ethics is going to disagree with me, but at the end of the day, there's no transcendental morality that applies to all people at times in atheism. Again, we've had a debate on this channel where there are going to be atheists who disagree with that statement. But just from my perspective, and if Objective wants to join and tell me I'm wrong, then or explain to me why I'm wrong, that's fine. But a lot of atheists hold to the view that morality is basically subjective. Well, I think one of the things that makes Christianity superior is that there's an objective foundation for ethics. It's that we have to be good people. We have to be righteous, or God is going to basically reject us at judgment, and that's going to be really bad. It's going to be an eternal punishment for that. So Christians should be theoretically motivated to be really good people, to do the right thing, even in a world where you will be mistreated. People are basically not going to reciprocate that love. Being a loving person in this world is actually an extremely difficult thing. Um, it's easy on its own, but the problem comes when not everyone else is behaving that way, and you're trying to be a loving person. You're trying to be kind to others, and something I think that everyone experiences when you try to do that is that other people really, I mean, not everybody, but a lot of people in society don't behave that way. It's a lot of dog eat dog kind of stuff. So, and also people will be nasty, and also even when you're trying to be loving, you will fall short at times. Um, but when you're trying to be a loving person, one of the things that really makes it difficult is that you notice that a lot of people won't like reciprocate that kind of treating other people. And I guess where was I going with this? Anyways, yeah. So you're trying to be loving, and it's difficult. But at the end of the day, you're required to do it as a Christian. And with the idea of the atonement, it kind of nukes all that. It's kind of like, well, you know you should be a good person, but if you aren't, don't worry about it because Jesus' blood covers it. So again, I think Dirty Varmint is exactly right. The atonement, the idea of Jesus dying for your sins, it really disincentivizes people from actually being good, which is the whole point of what Christ taught. See what other people. I have heard a lot from Eastern Orthodox, and I think substitution is what they call it. I primarily see Jesus Christ meriting our salvation by the perfect sacrifice on the cross, being God, also performing the perfect act of charity towards the Trinity. Okay. I see Jesus. Well, I don't think Jesus Christ merits our salvation in a direct sense. That's where I'm gonna have to differ for you. Why does Jesus sacrificing himself on the cross merit our salvation? I don't think that's even what Jesus taught. I mean, if Jesus taught that, I'd probably have to stop being a Christian. If I thought Jesus actually taught that, I'd probably be a Buddhist. I don't know what I would be. Buddhism would probably be the next like replacement religion for me, but like Christianity, I'd have to cross off the list because I just can't be part of a religion that I'm claimed I'm basically declared righteous because of somebody 2,000 years ago dying. I mean, I couldn't subscribe to that. But you could, I mean, if you want to join and explain to me why you think it makes sense, I would be happy to hear your perspective. He would have come even without original sin. James Apperson is in the chat. So Christians need fear of an imaginary being to be good. Okay, that's pretty atrocious straw man of what I was saying. And no, it's not that you're necessarily afraid of God. It's that you want to be obedient to God out of love. So it's kind of like someone's parents. Like there's two ways to look at it. You can obey them because you love them and because they created you, or you can be obedient because you don't want to get spanked, you know. But either way, like the idea is to be obedient. You don't need to be afraid, and obviously, the idea that God is imaginary is would need to be established. And righteously bloody, thanks you. Yeah, the truth that you have to merit your own salvation is what inspires fear of God. Yeah, giving huge incentive to be very good. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Like the current message of Christianity does not incentivize people to actually be good. Even though, and when I say that's obviously not what I thought Christ taught. Christ taught you have to be good to be get in heaven. This is what I'm highlighting right here. So this is Matthew 5:20. For I say to you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. So this is what Christ taught, but this is not something that Christians believe because they're being misled by the churches. You've misunderstood me? Yeah, probably. It's sometimes I do that quite often. It's hard to get the nuances of people's arguments from the chat, but feel free to elaborate. I'm having a tough day medically speaking, but hanging in there. Not a major setback, just pain management issues. Ah, shoot, I'm sorry to hear that. The merit would be towards God the Father. So he earns God the Father to forgive us. We still have to be good. It's like a terrible person saying, please forgive me, and a good person you love coming and saying, forgive them, they'll do better. Uh, you're an adult. No, yeah, that's why it's called an analogy, Hayden. It's called an analogy. Your point was that the only reason we obey God is because we're afraid of God. Not necessarily. I mean, obviously, even when it comes to secular human laws, some people just obey the law because they don't want to get punished. But there are a lot of people in society who just have no desire to break the law. So it depends on your disposition and your character. If you don't want to break the law because you're afraid to get caught, I mean, you're pretty much basically effectively behaving the same as someone who doesn't want to break the law because they just want to respect others in society. So either way, whatever motivates you, that's what we're saying is that the motivation comes from, the idea that there's a judgment. Like you can just love God and be happy to serve God, or you can be like, well, I want to do this thing, but I'm not going to because I'm afraid of going to hell. And obviously that not because you just believe in hell, just because it's kind of an interesting concept because you think it's a real place. If you've done something wrong, it is good that you are afraid, Saint Tommy. And that's something I would expect to hear from Saint Tommy. I mostly wanted to say I was not talking about not needing to. Well, here's the thing, Taurus. If Jesus dying on the cross merits our salvation, then yeah, we don't need to do good works to get into heaven. That's the thing about the atonement. It totally annihilates the idea of needing to do good works or be a good person. I was just reading from that article about justification. If Jesus' blood pays for our sins, then sinning is being disobedient. It's doing bad things. It's not doing good works. It's not being a righteous person. So if Jesus' blood covers all that, then there's no need to do it. So that's a huge problem, in my opinion. So theism is a belief of expediency? No, not at all. Not at all. Actually, believing that you have to be a good person can create a challenge for you because the flesh is warring against us. So it's actually more difficult to be a theist because as an atheist, there's nothing motivating you to act beyond your own impulses. But with theism, we have a judge that will judge us for our actions, not just in this world, but an eternal God. So it's not always expedient to it's not exactly expedient to have to deny ourselves. Now we can align our will with God, and then we're not denying ourselves. But for most people, there are like the passions of the flesh that have to be denied and things like that. So only perfect people go to heaven. Well, how perfect in what way? Because and again, the link is pinned for anyone who wants to join. No one's joining, so I know you said you're busy, Taurus, but if other people want to join and interact, it's fine. Morality is human preferences. Okay, that's your opinion. Yeah, I mean, you're going to act based on your preferences, but how will you be judged? Are you going to be judged by are you going to be judged by God? So you can act however you want, but and the same thing with our world. You can act however you see these people who get caught all the time doing all kinds of crimes. They were acting how they wanted, but they got caught, and then they got punished for their crimes. Same thing with us, with humans. Yeah, you can act however you want. You can act according to your preferences. So your preferences are your own, but there's a transcendental judge that is basically going to be the arbiter of who did good and bad. And so, according to Christianity, there will be justice for all people. Freddie, 13 above. Happy birthday, A's. Good to see you. Well, I'm not begging the question necessarily. I'm making claims without just backing them up. There are reasons to think that God exists. I'm not exactly establishing them. A lot of it is faith. So obviously, there are some aspects of what I'm claiming that can't be proven. That's why it's called faith. We don't know if it's true, but we put our faith in Christ because Christ is the one who was apparently the one who revealed these things to us, in addition to all the other prophets who were true prophets of God. So there were a lot of false prophets in history, and we can name them, but in some of them. But even the Bibles in the Old Testament says there were basically thousands of false prophets for every real prophet. This going back to the Old Testament period, in the time of Isaiah, Jeremiah, and all the prophets. It's constantly talking about how there are so many in the days of Saul. And again, as a skeptic, you're probably not going to believe any of these people are real. But if there's any historicity to this, the Old Testament is talking about how the false prophets are constantly creating problems for the Israelite people, the Jews, whatever you want to call them, and all of them. Basically, our faith is that these people, the true prophets, are actually revealing the will of a very real God. So, in my opinion, the idea of the existence of God should be established as rational and plausible and justified. And then you move to, well, which religion or theistic system, if you want to call it that, best presents that the actual nature of God. And I think that Christianity comes the closest. Yeah, well, if you join, we can kind of just go back and forth on it. Nuance is hard. What's going on? We have an open discussion about basically these topics right here. Where is it? There it is. So I've been discussing theism versus atheism, creationism, intelligent design versus evolution, Christian ethics versus secular humanism, Christian doctrine, the Bible, presuppositionalism versus evidentialism. A's philosophy. Which prophets were the true prophets, as in which prophecies came true? Well, obviously the ones that Jesus and I see Taurus has asked me, do I believe that Christ is God? I will answer that in a question. First, let me get to this question. Which prophets were the true prophets? As in which? Well, you have to understand what does prophecy even mean? A lot of people think it means predicting the future. That's only a small part of prophecy. Prophecy really just is basically revealing the will of God, revealing God, speaking God's commands to us or revealing things about God. It doesn't necessarily only mean predicting the future, even though that's kind of how a lot of people think about it. Really, I consider a prophet any person who communicates the will of God truly. Okay, so a true prophet is really just any person in this world through whom God is directly communicating to the rest of humanity. And some of those people are recorded in the Bible, and I believe actually that there were other people in history who basically did this as well, and they're not in the Bible. But all of them should be heard, and their ideas should be basically believed. We can go into specifics if you want, but basically that's my definition of a prophet: anyone who is truly revealing the will and communication of God. Do I believe that Jesus is God? I have a lot of videos on my channel. I do not. I'm a Unitarian, Taurus. Yeah, I think Unitarianism is what Jesus Christ taught. I have many videos on my channel why I think Unitarianism is the best understanding of the nature of Christ and God. I think there are many, many reasons to think that Jesus is not God, just from a logical approach, but also from Scripture. I just think it's so clear that Jesus is not God, and I think that's what Jesus taught. And that's another thing that like Charles Manson. Are you saying Charles Manson is a true prophet, James? I guess I mean I'm willing to hear any if someone claims to be a prophet of God, I'm willing to hear them. I mean, I will take their words into consideration. Hosea is my favorite prophet. Well, to me they're all really the same. I mean, they're revealing different information at different times based on the context. But for me, Jesus is not technically as the information he revealed isn't superior to Isaiah or Jeremiah or the other prophets. It's all equal in its value, in my opinion. Now I feel like I got the hang on things. There's a man on Substack that got real enthusiastic about telling me that. He must be. He claimed to be. Well, I mean, one thing that Jesus said is, "You shall know them by their fruit." So I'm not sure if his fruit is exactly what would be predicted from a true prophet, but I guess you never really know. Um, Hosea married an immoral woman as a means of prophecy. So when God gave the law to Moses, was that a prophecy in your view? Is there anyone you can cite as a source for your definition of prophecy or your own definition etymology? Well, I think it's very clear that Moses was a prophet. Uh, can I get a verse for that? Probably not right off the top of my head, but I'm pretty sure that there are verses in the Bible which directly call so you see prophecy. The root word there, prophecy, prophet. You can see it's kind of the same word. A prophet is someone who prophesies. So yeah, some prophets talk about things that'll happen in the future, but a prophet is just anyone who directly communicates with God and reveals that communication to humanity. So it doesn't have to be necessarily someone in the Bible. So I think that the Bible even does talk about how there were unnamed prophets. But, if we were to find their writings, they would be as equally as important as all the other prophets. And if there are people today who are in direct communication with God, then I don't see why their information is less important than what's in the Bible. It's all Moses bore even more violence as fruit. Seems like Charles' greatest failure was letting secular authority interrupt his body count. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people who do. The question is, just because someone is basically engaging in violence doesn't necessarily mean they're doing something that's 100% wrong. Like, if there's an evil force in this world, like I would say probably one of the most evil forces in history is communism. So I don't have any problem with the idea that someone might be commanded by God to, annihilate communism. Uh, but if someone was commanded to go and, just massacre a bunch of random people in some random place because of where they are, then that would be problematic. But the Bible, I like it, we proved in our conversation the other night, it does say that when Moses was attacking the people that Moses fought again, they were basically sinful people. They were evil. So if we're taking the Bible at face value, that should be taken. I got to go for now and hope to come back. Yeah, feel free to come back and let's have a conversation about theology, because I mean, I know we have starting from a point of disagreement, but I would like to explain to you like what my viewpoint is. I'm not asking if Moses was considered a prophet. I'm talking about giving the law specifically. Sorry for the confusion. All right, let me go back to your question here. So when God gave the law to Moses, yes. So that would be prophecy in my view. Is there anyone you could cite? Is it just sort of a definition of prophecy, or is that your own definition? I don't think there might not be a scholar, but like let me see if I can find a verse. There's one really famous verse. Let's see if I can find it. So I'll raise up a prophet. Uh, Deuteronomy 18. All right, let's see what that has to say about things. Deuteronomy 18. Ah, here it is. Found it. That was quick. Thank you for the internet. Where is it? All right. So Deuteronomy, if you look at Deuteronomy 18, so Deuteronomy, God is communicating the law to Moses. And you go back to verse 15. This is so Deuteronomy 18:15. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among you, from your countrymen. You shall listen to him. So a lot of people have said that refers to Jesus Christ. But here we see a prophet like me. So this is Moses speaking revelation right here. So Moses is calling himself a prophet, which means he is engaging in prophecy. So to be a prophet is to, by definition, be involved in prophecy. So that's kind of how I look at it. What is communism? Well, I guess there are different ideas of it. Basically, it's the idea that the government basically takes possession of private property and also has a great deal of control over how society operates, as opposed to like a constitutional republic, which the United States is, which is basically allows people to, which theoretically should allow people to operate freely outside of the interference of the government. But one of the major objectives of communism is to basically have the government run private enterprise, which is a very terrible and dangerous idea. Moses was a circle. How can he be a prophet? Again, these are allegations. Because technically everything God says is in accordance with God's will, but the word prophecy describes, which is always, not necessarily. All right, we have our first guest. We have James Apperson. How you doing, James?
I'm doing all right. Let me know if I need to turn my mic down at all.
I think your sound is pretty good. I think it was
All
pretty
right,
good.
very good. So I looked it up on Google just now,
All right.
and so it has certain defining traits. One is collective ownership.
Mm-hmm.
Two is classless society. Three is egalitarianism.
Okay.
And these sound an awful lot like Jesus to me, right?
Yeah.
So everybody collectively owns everything, and we don't. There's no free or slave, no man or woman in Christ, right? It's this classless society. It get
Mm-hmm.
very egalitarian, and I'm like, well, how come communism's okay when Jesus does it, but it's wrong when anybody else does it?
Well, that's a really good point. I think the main difference, there's a lot of differences. I think that the main difference would be that I'm not against communism inherently, but I guess the main idea is that if it's being done voluntarily, so if a bunch of people want to go into a communist country and surrender all their goods to the class, like this actually is recorded in Acts chapter 2, where the Christians are, again, not that I don't really find the book of Acts as being absolutely authoritative for me, but it is something that it records history and we can, just see what it says. So in Acts chapter 2, I know this is just going to be a little bit boring real fast, so I'm just going to go read it. If you go to the end of Acts chapter 2, I'm not going to pull it up on the screen. But it does say, let me just read it. Hold on to get there. Yeah, and all those who had believed were together, had all things in common. This is Acts chapter 2, starting at verse 44. And all those who had believed were together and had all things in common. And they began selling their property and possessions and were sharing them with all as anyone might have need. Day by day, continuing with one mind in the temple and breaking bread. Okay, so that was basically the end of it. So the early Christians apparently did live in a communist society, according to the definitions you just gave. The problem is that they weren't like commandeering the government and basically taking control of the rest of society. It was all people who were voluntarily part of that operation. So yeah, if people want to go into form a communist society and everyone's part of it and everyone's okay with what's happening, yeah, I don't have a problem with communism. The problem with most communists is that they violently overtook the countries in which they spread, and this is one country after another, and they massacred anyone who didn't believe in their ideas and enforced their values on the rest of society.
And
And
that
by the
sounds
way,
an awful lot like
go ahead.
Echo. I was
Yeah,
going to say
sorry.
that it sounds an awful lot like Christian colonizers over the centuries, doesn't it?
It does, yeah. Christians obviously did that as well. Although I would say they did that in spite of what Christ taught, not necessarily because of what Christ taught. But nevertheless, if communists want their ideas to be taken seriously, I don't think they should basically take over the rest of society. I think they should try to convince other people to become part of their society. And the problem with communism today, I see you in the background, Truth and Telos. I'll bring it up in a second. But I want to have this conversation about communism with James because I think it's important. So I'll bring it a little bit of truth. But what I see the communists doing is basically in every society on earth they didn't do it democratically as they say they do. They say they talk about democracy, but what they really did was they basically annihilated all political opposition. You look at all the communist countries on earth right now. You got China, Cuba, Vietnam. There's no democracy in this country. You're not allowed to vote your way out of these things. If you oppose the government power, then they send you guns to your house and they kill you. Essentially, this is China, North Korea, all these totalitarian societies that are based on Marxism.
Well, sure, but where'd they get that idea from? When I think about back to like Christian text and things like that, it looks like the same thing. It's trying to form a government, right, carving a government out of the middle of a country to say we're going to be our own governance with that Jesus, King of the Jews, right? This is a government. This is an authoritative structure, and for them to say, you know what, if you don't join us, violent things are going to happen to you. So you might want to join, wink, wink, nod, nod, of your own free will. But if you don't, then bad things are going to happen to you. And then once you get in, you can't get out, right? Like you're in, and it just seems like that's what heaven is, right? Like heaven is, once you get there, you ain't leaving. You don't get to change your mind, and you're just stuck there in celestial North Korea, praising dear leader morning, noon, and night in this communist utopia. And everybody that didn't agree to it, well, they get sent to some kind of torture basement forever. Like, it doesn't seem any better to me.
Well, I do think that there is in Christianity, and when you're talking about acceptance in heaven, God is giving us a choice. We can choose to do what He wants, and we can get into heaven, or we can, disagree with God, and we will get that judgment, and we will go where, we will receive that judgment. So no one's being forced to do anything, and the
Well,
idea of not
sure.
being,
I
that's
mean,
that's
if
not being able to leave heaven. I don't know that for sure. I mean, maybe that's something that's taught, but I actually do think people have the option of leaving heaven. But I just think once you get there, you really don't want to because it's so good. But maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe you really. I still think people in heaven have free will, so theoretically they can leave if they want. They
I don't. I
go
don't think
ahead.
how I don't see how it would be possible. Now, I don't believe in libertarian free will, anyways. But just to grant it for this argument, how are you going to have a kingdom where everybody has what you call free will, and yet be absolutely certain that for the rest of eternity, nobody's going to have an unapproved thought, feeling, or any such thing that leads to an unapproved action? How do you assure that if everybody has freedom?
Well, again, I don't think it's probably not possible in an ontological sense to guarantee, but I think that the people that God lets in will basically are let in on the premise that they have proven that they will use their free will to basically obey God. And like I said, it's possible that maybe if people make the wrong decisions, they will get kicked out of heaven. I don't know, but because I do believe in free will. I think that the thing is, when you look at what Jesus taught, the idea of who goes to heaven is the people who align their will with God. So once you align your will with God, then basically you're in harmony with God. You're gonna do God's will. Will you do it for all eternity? That's a good question, but at least for that time, God can see that your will is in alignment with Him.
Right. So our Trinitarian. Oh, hello, other people.
Sorry, I just wanted to. Freddie and Truth, I want to have this conversation with James. So, James, you're going to be given preeminence here because I think this is a good conversation. But we'll get to Truth and Telos and Freddie in a minute. But yeah, James. So I think this conversation about communism is interesting, and it's like basically similarities to Christianity. So go ahead, James.
Right. So, what is, in your view, what is hell? Is hell just non-existence, or is it eternal conscious suffering, or what is it?
Well, in my opinion, the consciousness is inextinguishable. So there will always be a consciousness. This is why I disagree with the so-called annihilationists. There are a
Mhm.
lot of Christian annihilationists out there today saying that at judgment, God just basically extinguishes your soul and you're just no more, which there are a lot of really serious problems with that. Just at a bare level, it's basically what atheists believe. And I'm not criticizing atheists. What I'm saying is that what atheism says is that when you die, your consciousness basically disappears forever and you're no more and you're going to oblivion. And I
Right.
just feel like that God's judgment being exactly what atheists think is going to happen is kind of, for me, it's just a red flag, basically, is what I want
Well,
to say.
to me, it seems poetic because if you think about it, God's an atheist. He's pretty sure nobody created him, so we got a lot in common.
That's one way to look at it. Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting point. But I guess like from God's perspective, God knows everything that is. So God knows there's nothing. I would think that God would know if there's another being beyond him, according to the definition of God. So
Maybe. I mean, if there's something that somebody didn't know, they wouldn't know that they didn't know it. So I think that that's possible. You could be smart enough to make a universe, and yet have a whole other layer of reality that you don't even see and know that exists. Theoretically
yeah,
possible.
actually, believe it or not, in early Christianity, there was this guy named Marcion, and he actually did teach, excuse me, that the God that created this world was a lesser God, and there's a God above him that was more powerful than he was, and that was the God of Jesus Christ. And so that is a really interesting idea that actually has precedent within the Christian movement, if you want to call it that, very early on. So Marcion was in the 2nd century.
Yeah.
So the idea that there's a god, a lesser God who's basically doesn't even know there's a God above him is not without some precedent. I will say it's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So
But but
why would any given God choose not to turn off consciousness of people who don't end up in heaven?
well, we because consciousness, our self. I would put it this way: reality is the way it is, and because of its foundational essence. This is going to be a long-winded explanation, but basically, the laws of nature, the laws of physics, just are what they are because there's a foundational essence which is eternal and immutable and unchanging. And this is a really difficult thing to comprehend, but it just is what it is. And in my opinion, that the basis of the consciousness, soul or mind or whatever, is immaterial and indestructible. So just like the laws of physics are immutable, and basically reality itself is not extinguishable, I think that our souls are basically made of a substance that is inextinguishable and cannot be destroyed ultimately. Now it can be punished and made to experience suffering, but it can't be totally annihilated. So I don't know if that is. I
But
know
it
I
could
said
be
I know it says I just made all that up, but it is kind of based on the idea of an eternal, non-contingent substance that it basically exists with some level of aseity.
right. Well, but we know it is possible to turn consciousness off. There you can have non REM sleep, you can have a coma, right? So eternity in a coma where you technically exist but have no consciousness would seem to satisfy all conditions.
Yeah, well, even when you're asleep, you have you can be asleep. Like this is what happens when we're asleep. Aside from the dream state, sometimes people can be asleep for 8 hours and it feels like a minute. So consciousness technically, but we know our bodily processes are still undergoing because our mind is still operational. So our subconscious mind still dominates when we're asleep. It controls our breathing, it controls our heart rate, things like that, our
Right.
digestion when we're asleep. So our mind is still operating even though we're not conscious of it. So believe it or not, even when we're not having a conscious experience, our consciousness is actually still exists. It's just not our mind isn't transferring anything to our consciousness, so it's registered as basically no experience whatsoever.
Right. Well, coma, I think, would be a more bold example of it, where there's just and somebody can actually be brain dead too, right? Like there's just, and sometimes they can be resuscitated later. They heal and they recover, and you take them off the machine, and they'll tell you, yeah, I didn't have any sensory experiences at all during that time, and the doctors
Yeah,
can measure that too.
I think what's going on there, believe it or not, is we are still conscious, but because our consciousness while we're alive is tied to our brain state, our brain is not transferring anything to our consciousness, so it's registered as kind of non-existence or no experience. But our consciousness is technically still operational. It is perceived through our consciousness as basically no time whatsoever or no experience. But I do believe we are technically still conscious, even though it's not being registered as an actual direct, like perceptible experience.
And so, is somebody in a coma thinking about anything or feeling anything?
No, they're not. Their mind is not generating anything for the consciousness to register, so it's not generating experience. That's the whole
Right.
problem. The point. Our consciousness still exists, our soul still exists, but there's nothing our body is sending to it as a sort of something to be perceived. So there's no mental state at that point.
So could hell be that way?
Potentially, but it's not described that way because it says there will be wailing and gnashing of teeth. So it appears to be that there will actually be suffering, but it appears to me that in the afterlife state there will be conscious experience.
Like very, very unpleasant or suffering form of experience,
Yes.
and people can't escape from that.
Well, again, that's another question. There even in early Christianity, you have Origen who said that hell is a temporary holding place. It's almost like a really bad level of purgatory, and that when you go to hell, that you are basically going to be forced to undergo severe punishment until you basically change your ways and repent there in hell. So even as early as the second century, some Christians were saying that people can get out of hell. So there's the idea of eternal conscious torment is itself a question. So yeah, it's the problem with heaven, hell, and annihilationism is fully defined in the Bible. So that it does open up to these different viewpoints, which are definitely valid. I also would say my viewpoint is that the consciousness is inherently a substance that's eternal. It can't be destroyed, and it appears that there will be a conscious experience after life, and it'll be pleasant or painful depending on our actions in this world. So, and by the way, James, I don't want to ignore our other guests for too
Sure,
long.
sure,
Yeah.
sure.
So,
Yeah.
but I really think that conversation about communism was an interesting one, and especially
Absolutely.
I wanted to get into you about the stuff about egalitarianism because, in my opinion, egalitarianism doesn't exist, and it shouldn't be something that a government strives to achieve. But
All right.
it depends on that. But let's get to I think Truth and Telos joined first, and then Freddie. So I don't know if you had anything you wanted to say, Truth and Telos, or you just wanted to be present with us.
Yeah, no, it was. I was going to ask, what are morals?
Well, that's a really good question. I mean, it depends on your perspective, but for me, morals are basically what we think are good and bad, which again are relativistic terms. But for me, our morals should be based on something absolute and transcendent and objective. And I think the only foundation for objective morality is a transcendental universal mind, which would be God.
Oh, okay. So yeah, there has to be a basis from which the morality is derived.
Correct.
Yeah.
Well, you can obviously everyone's going to develop their own moral system, but the question is, does it align with the objective moral system by which we will be judged? So, yeah, we see people in this life engaging all types of morality. We see criminals, we see really good people, we see everything in between. So in this life, people are going to have their own moral code, but the problem is that what's the universal moral code by which all people will be judged? So if you abide by the universal moral code, you will have a favorable judgment. And that's ultimately the goal of Christianity, is to be within that favorable judgment and go with God. But if you choose to ignore all that and just do your own thing, you far more likely to disobey the moral code of God and thus receive that judgment. So that's why we need to have faith in Christ, because Christ told us what the moral code is, so that you can have a favorable judgment.
Yeah, because I mean that's kind of what I would argue with any atheist, is when we get to let's say I walk into the atheist house and I go and I unalive their family, right? Like their parents or whatever. How, like, from what moral objective standpoint would they say that I was wrong to do that?
Wait, how much are you charging to push Mama from the train?
It would just be like a random act of insanity.
Oh, it's free? You're not going to charge me a dime?
Yeah.
All right, well, we'll talk later.
Right. So, I mean, in the truest, sense of it, somebody would probably not be okay with that happening, though. And so I guess that's where the question would come down to: where does an atheist derive their morality from? Because if they can claim, well, that's not right to do, then I would say, well, according to what standard?
So we actually, I don't know if you saw this, we had a debate on our channel, and one of the debate participants is actually with us right now, Objective Ethics. His name is Objective Ethics. So maybe he would like to give you an answer to that question. Objective, did you have a response to why unaliving someone's entire family is objectively wrong?
Yeah, well, my response would be because there is an objective law of morality, and it's a natural law, just like the immutable laws that Ace was talking about, as far as I'm concerned. And I could lay out the argument for that right now, but that's a whole conversation to get into for me to try and explain all that, which I'm happy to do. But addressing several people at the same time is really hard for me in my particular mental state, given the fact I'm having a rough day. But what I would like to do, and I don't mean to cut in front of Mr. Freddie here, but I jumped in because you guys are using the term God's objective morality. And as I clearly just showed in that debate, that is a false equivocation. Okay, you cannot have an objective morality if you objective anything if you have a mind or a will or an intention. By definition, you've got a definitional fallacy there. It doesn't exist. So you're going to be basically inventing your own definition for what objectivity is at that point. So all bets are off. It's whatever you want it to be. But the real world, the world that we actually navigate in, has meanings to words. I know there's somebody in the chat named Dirty Varmint that was trying to defend A's philosophy's use of the word prophecy, and he said that words are descriptive, not prescriptive. But the problem with that is that's not untrue when you just say that. My example to Dirty Varmint and to you guys in this is that I told Dirty Varmint, if you refer to a car as a baby stroller, you're not going to be able to navigate in the real world very effectively. So even though words are essentially descriptive, we still or prescriptive, excuse me, we still have to function in the real world. So if we don't come to an agreement as a society of how we're going to use words and what the actual definitions of words are, then we might as well just throw away the dictionary, because it serves no purpose. So your objective morals God's morals are not objective. And I challenged my opponent in the debate to prove that, and he completely ran away from the question. One of the many reasons I won that debate, and that's just not me saying that, every single person in the chat so far is saying that I won that debate. And that's one of the reasons they're citing, is that he never debunked any of my premises. So he tried to attack the conclusion without addressing any of my premises for my own argument for the natural law of objective morality. And then he never addressed the problem with calling it objective, calling God's morals objective. He never addressed that either. Yeah. And nobody has. I've never had a single person attempt to do that. So that's what I came on here to do, is get you guys to go ahead and justify this. How is God's anything objective? I'm very curious how you guys are coming to that conclusion. And I'm sorry, Freddie, I didn't mean to jump in front of you there.
Well, yeah, but so I'm confused. You said that morality is a natural law. Just real quick.
That's correct. It's called the natural law of morality. And I'm actually, even though this is something that I've been thinking about for a very long time, I just recently came to my own argument, and I had not actually researched this until right before my debate. But it turns out that this idea of the natural law of morality goes way back into ancient Greece. So it's not just something I just invented myself. So there's a lot of literature.
Of course, there's tons of pagan Stoic philosophers in Greece. But the problem that I have with that classification would be, you're basically saying it's a law, much like gravity is a law of physics, or sunlight coming through at whatever the speed of light is a law of, etc. But is there a way to quantify or visualize ethics?
I do believe that because it is a natural law, there is a way to quantify it. However, I don't think we've gotten to that point yet.
Okay.
So everything has to be judged on a case-by-case basis. And just like everything else about religion or anything else, ultimately what we're doing is we're taking our own interpretations of things, right? So ultimately, everything that we determine when it comes to things like morality, for example, and such, is that we're giving a subjective interpretation of it, which is why we have so many different ideas about just Christianity alone, so many different denominations, for example, so many different religions, because everybody's coming at this subjectively. So just because we haven't just found a way to codify it, so to speak, and I'm using that term really loosely here, doesn't mean that it's impossible. What we can do is observe things and observe the way things are affected, just like we do with dark matter or dark energy. We don't actually see those things. We can't look at them directly, but we can look at the effects that they have. And that's a good way to approach it, in my opinion. But before I spend too much time defending the natural law, I'd like to, if I may, just to pose that to you guys, is how are you guys defending the objective standard of God's morality?
Well, it's kind of like in a sense of how, I guess it has to circle back around to the how do we know XYZ is bad, because that's really the root question. And there's just two different ways that we're trying to approach that question. You're saying it's a natural law, much like gravity. I would say that it is because it is an inherent virtue given by God, the creator. But what I wouldn't understand about your position is, like, let's say I am somebody who is born just an absolute psychopath that has no way to possibly process this morality, this law of morality. So I could kill, cheat, steal, lie, and actually do good things, and it's all the same thing. I'm processing these actions as the same exact neutral thing, and yet I would be defying that law of morality, versus nobody can defy the law of physics or defy the laws that constrain how fast light moves, right? So how do you defy a law that's a natural law? I can't make myself walk through a wall and defy that law.
Because it's a transcendental law. So it's just like saying that just because I can hate somebody, that loving somebody doesn't exist, right? That doesn't make sense.
But that's not a law, though. It's an emotion. Love and hate are emotions.
but they are immutable truths. We know that for a fact that when we love somebody and we hate somebody, these fire off chemicals in our brain, and they take a different pathway and they cause a different set of emotions. And so there's a real experience that we have with them that's undeniable.
Right. Yeah. So like I'm for reals experiencing gravity. It's undeniable. But how can you quantify that I'm experiencing morality?
Because morality is part of well-being. Well-being, as I've laid out in my debate,
According to whom?
So the morality is tied directly to well-being. Well-being is tied directly to the imposition of free will. And all of these things are things that we believe that we have. Now, there are some people who, I didn't mean to cut you off, just to clarify real quick to get ahead of it. There are people, specifically skeptics and different types of skeptics, that will make an argument that free will doesn't exist. I don't think, unless Mr. Apperson, he may take that stance, I'm not sure. But as far as atheist philosophy and you, I assume that the three of us will agree that free will does exist. Is that correct?
No.
Oh, okay. So that's another conversation to have, actually. That's a whole other debate.
Correct. Yeah, I don't believe in free will. So that's like, and even if I did, I don't see how that would add to the point saying that you were like, well, love and hate are chemical reactions that cause emotion. So it's still going back to the same root thing, an emotion that's experiential. But how can I experience morality on your basis? Like if I approach it from your formula, I guess.
Sure. I'm just trying to summarize this because I didn't come on to try and have a debate about that specifically. I was really trying to figure out where you guys are coming up with objectivity. But to answer your question fairly, so basically, to come to the conclusion that it's actually a law of nature is to look at nature. And so my argument is, and I do not support human exceptionalism, and I have a different idea about what consciousness is. So, like for example, when A and James were discussing consciousness and the mind, I already had this conversation with Ace, and I actually raised the same exact example that Mr. Apperson had raised about the person in the coma. And what A's response is basically doing is he's misunderstanding what we call autonomic functions of the body, like breathing, for example. And another thing he's not understanding is that there are biological creatures, animals like jellyfish, for example, that don't have any brains at all, but they are aware of their environment. So that, see what I'm saying? So now forgive me because I'm having medical problems. I'm a little distracted. So your question was, so it comes down to nature. So what we do is we look at evolution, which I know a lot of people have issues when you start talking about evolution. I'm not here to get into that debate, but evolution to a certain degree, most people agree on, at least at a micro level. But on the macro level, we have social evolution, we have technological evolution. So we see evolution in many ways. Evolution as the survival of this planet and life on this planet is tied directly to things like the food chain, for example. So we know that there are things like invasive species that have a detrimental impact to the well-being of everything else. So all these things, the food chain, when you look at invasive species and all these things are tied to this well-being of every organism. We all have to work together. Humans cannot just terraform the planet to such a degree that we chop down all the rainforests and put all the carbon in the air without a detrimental effect on humanity and every other species. So well-being is tied to this evolutionary process of everything that's all of life. So it's tied to all of life. It all has to work together. We have to work together with the animals. We have to work together with the plants. Plants or animals, for the most part, have a natural way of balancing out within their own environment. You know what I mean? So the prey and the predator balances with the plant life that the vegetarians eat. There's just a whole balance that's all written into this life that we're living with. And that's a really rough example. I apologize about that. I hope you followed that.
Truth, did you have any response to all that?
Oh, sorry, I forgot I was muted. Yeah. So I mean, the way that you just explained that was very hard to follow. And I guess the problem that I'm seeing here is you're trying to, I guess, put evolution onto the same form of experience than morality. And I mean, okay. So I like to take an approach sometimes, and it's not 100% true, but like most of the time, when you have to make this huge hodgepodge of like trying to draw different points to reinforce what should be just a natural occurring phenomena, the more convoluted it gets, the more likelihood that it's just not the reality, right? Whereas if we're saying that we have a moral code derived from God, who is the creator, and it's as simple as knowing that, I think if you try to stack the two up, it becomes it looks not so great for, like, I guess what you are trying to get across. You know what I mean?
I really respect where you're coming from. However, I would vehemently disagree with the fact that as soon as you introduce a God into the picture, this is why intentional design falls apart so quickly, because once you understand probabilities, the natural explanation is always going to be greater than or equal than to the God hypothesis in every aspect, including the aspect you're bringing into it. Because once you bring the God hypothesis into it, what you're doing is you're just simply hand waving away the need to explain any mechanisms. You're just saying, well, God did it, therefore that's all it is. And that's really, it becomes circular reasoning, and there are so many fallacies. It becomes a definitional fallacy, because you're just simply defining this into existence. Not only are you defining God into existence, because we have no empirical evidence of this God, but you're defining the traits and the nature of God and the things that God does into existence. And so all of this boils down to fallacies. So my argument would be that if you're introducing logical fallacies and you've overly complicated the issue by now bringing in an undefined God and into the picture, a truly undefined God, because the explanations of this God and the mechanisms have require the same amount of evidence and explanation as what I'm requiring, except that you're adding, at the end of the day, you're going to add one more step, which is God. Therefore, Occam's razor actually leads to the natural explanation in any given situation, in my opinion.
I just want to point out that you guys are having the debate you didn't want to have. And also, I dropped a link over here in the private chat. I don't have a wrench. I couldn't put it in regular chat. Anybody that wants to grab that and review it some other time, at their own, their own leisure.
What is it? What is it, James? Sorry about that. I can post it in the general chat.
So it's a video from a channel called Bridge the Divide, and they cover a lot of these moral issues, and I think brilliantly. And it's one of the things I love about that channel.
All right, I have posted that video in the general chat, so anyone who wants to go review that is able to do so.
Awesome. So I don't want to get in the middle of a debate that isn't supposed to be a debate anyways, but I just...
Well, no, this is good. This is exactly the kind of conversation that I want to have. It's covering a number of really important topics that, it can be, it's a debate, but it's also just a conversation. So we can have debates, conversations, and something in between. So let's go ahead.
Yeah. And it's funny because at the end of the day, the natural moral law argument is just as unprovable as the God decreed it argument. Because again, you said, well, we just aren't at the point yet where we can prove this law, but it may happen. Just like I could say, well, we're just not at the point yet where we can prove God's existence scientifically, of course, but it may happen. So it's still a stalemate. And then that's why we have to start looking at the foundational argument of, what you're trying to draw into it. It still has no evidence. There's no proof. Whereas I can point to the pages on a book at least and say, well, look, this is where we derive the moral ethic from. And there's, quite a bit centralized around the entirety of the Bible, which was written by dozens of different authors across 3 different continents, across thousands of years, in the time when they didn't have Twitter or Facebook or cell phones or even, very advanced means of getting letters from one to another. So there's a somewhat cohesive argument being made in the Bible versus we're just not there yet, so we can't prove it on paper, but I could say the same thing.
Well, I agree with you, and I concede to a certain degree. However, I would push back heavily on that by doing exactly what I did in my debate, which is to say we need to do, because of our limitations, what we need to do is look at everything on a case-by-case basis. So if we look at actually the Bible, And I'm certainly not going to come on here and trash all over the Bible like I had to do in that debate. But I'll just put it, as succinctly as possible and politely as possible, that when you compare the actions, the actual action, which remember, morality requires actions in my worldview. You can't have an immoral thought. It's an action. So speech and actions like punching someone in the nose or Xing babies in floods, actual actions. When you look at these things, that's when you compare it on a case-by-case basis. And what happens with the theological worldview is that you ultimately have to default back onto, well, God's sovereignty or God's ways are higher than our ways. You don't have any kind of an argument to justify the actual actions as being good, but you're beholden to a belief system that says anything God does is good, and it becomes a circular argument. Well, how do you know? Well, because God said it's good. Well, how do you know it's good? Well, because God said so. Well, how do you know that? Well, because God is good.
Well,
this is another fallacy.
So that's interesting though, because that argument would fall apart with me, because in the Bible God says He is creating, so it's an active tense there, good and evil. So I've got no problem with the morality still stemming from the Creator, who is creating both the good and the evil that morality would be attached to.
I would like to file a complaint with Him creating evil. Is there like a complaint box I can slip that into? Or?
And I would also say that, again, you're coming into a what's known as a special pleading fallacy, because it's the creation of good and evil isn't the problem. First of all, that has to be proven, and that's just an assumption. It becomes a definitional fallacy that I mentioned earlier. But even if we just take things on a case-by-case basis, it's not. So I had I hate to call it a debate, but a very polite discussion with a philosopher named Dr. Derek McAllister. And we're kind of have this ongoing thing. And he tried to argue for God's objective morality by using a silly analogy, in my opinion. He's the one that brought it up, but saying that it's like a referee in a football game. And the reason this analogy falls apart is exactly the reason what you're saying falls apart, in my opinion, respectfully, is that the referee doesn't go and tackle people. The referee doesn't grab the ball and run for touchdowns. And, all the rules protect the referee. You're not allowed to tackle the referee, but the referee is there to basically regulate the game and enforce the rules. So what you're saying is that what's happening according to the Bible is that not only is God setting the rules and enforcing the rules, but then God's coming down and tackling people by Xing babies, and He's committing the actual actions that He's prohibiting people from committing. And He's telling people when they do it, it's immoral. And people are saying, well, when God does it, it's not immoral. And this becomes a special pleading fallacy I was talking about.
I'm not special pleading anything though. Remember, I said that I don't believe in free will. So we are the vessel, right? Which is here on earth. We're doing things, but God has already decreed and predetermined before time ever even began what was going to happen. And that would include the good and the evil, which would bring me back to my argument of somebody cannot be born in a way that they can defy gravity. That's like a natural law. I've never seen somebody that can float around and what I mean? But people can be born that literally do not have the ability to discern between what would be immoral, good, or evil. And so they're defying this law that you're trying to say exists, which would then make it have to be not a natural phenomena, but instead it's now something more like a, even if you want to say like socioeconomic phenomena or an emotional phenomena, it takes the physicality of what you're saying out of the equation. And that's when we get to, so where do you derive that standard from? Because now it's just a notion. You have a notion of morality, and where you derive it from now has to go, it can go only one way for you. And you would have to say, like, you have to point to some source. You can't just say, well, it came out of nowhere, right? Because you would agree that even the Big Bang came from somewhere, right?
I do believe the Big Bang came from somewhere, and I think that most cosmologists do as well. But that's, again, a whole other thing. But to address, so unless I'm missing something, and again, I'm not in top form. I really didn't come to try and have a super intelligent conversation. I was really come to figure out how you guys are coming up with objective morality, which I don't think you have. Nobody has yet. And so, but to answer your question fairly, I think you're talking about two different issues here. First of all, the issue of determinism, which essentially means we're just meat puppets. So it doesn't matter. Why are we being held responsible for our actions, which aren't even choices at that point? That's one question I would have for you. What's the point of heaven and hell? What's the whole point of all of it? The other question I would have for you is, or comment for you is, just because we can do something that works against a natural law, it doesn't mean the natural law doesn't exist. So gravity is a thing, but because of the laws of motion, I can fly an airplane, I can launch myself into outer space, I can jump really high, I can do all the kinds of different things. Doesn't mean just because I'm going the opposite direction of gravity that gravity isn't going to eventually take hold or be relevant. So it's all relevant to a certain degree. The law of gravity doesn't go away just because I'm flying into outer space. You know what I'm saying? So now I will. So there's just a lot of elements with that I think just because we could work against something on a temporary level or an individual level doesn't mean that thing does not exist. And again, it's about what governs us as a species and as so individually, which is why I think the only way to do it, because I think you're right about the lack of evidence working both ways. I disagree that it's not. I think Occam's razor isn't on my side with that lack of evidence because of what I mentioned about once you introduce a God hypothesis, you've really overcomplicated the issue. However, we both do share some of that responsibility that the burden that neither one of us can meet by my own admission at this point. But I do think that this is why we look at things on a case-by-case basis, which in that case, what you're doing, and I mean no disrespect when I say this, because maybe it's my own lack of understanding here, because I'm not in top form, but it sounds to me like what you're doing is avoiding the responsibility and putting all the responsibility on God because we're just meat puppets. Am I misunderstanding that?
Yeah, correct. I mean, the ultimate authority is God. He has foreordained all things that will ever happen into eternity before time ever began. And the Bible is very clear on this. In Ephesians chapter 1, verse 9, Paul says, having made known to us the mystery of the will of him in accordance with the pleasure of him, which he proposed in him, the him being Christ. So everything is done, okay, in the will of God, according to his pleasure. And so if it's somebody doing something bad that ultimately makes them end up not going to heaven when they die, that was according to the will and pleasure of God. He was the one that foreordained that. And it's the same argument that Paul makes in, I believe it's Romans, when he says, but what shall the potter say to the vessel? Why did you make me so? Right.
Right. We see this in Toy Story with Sid, right? And who are they to question Sid? And I think that's a beautiful message. Preach on, brother. Preach on.
Yeah, and just so you know, too, what Paul was doing in the first century there in Rome is he was doing the same thing that I'm kind of doing with you. You're taking a Socratic, Stoic, philosophical approach to this, and Paul was going to these Stoic philosophers, and that's why he uses the kind of verbiage that he does, because he's well laws around them and the natural phenomena around them, and that's why part of them were not adhering to Grecian worship of different deities. That's where you get Socratics from. They're like, well, wait a second, let's look at this a little bit deeper. But that's why he's able to have these kind of conversations with them and say, look, he uses very simple language. The clay does not say to the potter, why did you make me so? It just is what it is. It was made by the creator, and that is the allegory to us as humans. We are who we are. We will do what we will do. There is no free will to it, and therefore the morality aspect effectively falls apart on your end if that is in fact the truth, and the Bible is proclaiming that. So I don't know if you've ever heard somebody like me say, hey, this is what the Bible is proclaiming, but it might be worth considering.
Well, I've heard the argument from determinism, which is where you're arguing from, and here's what I would say to summarize it from the outside looking in, if I may, and supposed to do with the exegesis of it. The eisegesis says, okay, so God's sitting there at the drawing board. He's hanging out on his rocking chair up in the heavens. There's nothing that's been made, and he's like, you know what? I'm really bored, so I'm going to create a bunch of people that I'm going to essentially create sin. I'm going to put the sin in them. I'm going to cause them essentially to sin and regulate everything that they do by my determined will. Then I'm going to send myself down as my son to sacrifice myself to myself so that I could forgive them for the sin that I put them under. It just seems so ridiculous at that point, and so unnecessary. And we seem to be the victims the entire time, the hapless meat puppets, And I don't know how you've gotten around that, or if you understand my objection to that.
Yeah, no, I understand it, and what it comes down to is, again, like in Acts chapter 17, Paul is at the Areopagus out there in Rome, where there would be Stoics, philosophers, pagans. This was a very, very active area. And actually, where he would be at when he's delivering this, Acts chapter 17, would be at the hill just below the Areopagus. So where Paul is probably standing, he's addressing this crowd of people. They would see the Areopagus behind him. And he says in Acts 17:24 and following, he says, "The God, the one having made the world and all things that are in it, he of heaven and the earth being Lord, not in handmade temples dwells." So that's what's behind him, the temple, the giant temple over there of like Athena or whatever. And he says, "Nor by hands of men is he served as needing anything himself, because he is the one giving to all life and breath and the all." So again, the argument is that it's everything that you are given is given to you by God. That includes the morality, that includes the subjectivity, subjectiveness, the objectiveness. And so when I go back to this same foundation, you need to explain where you get your standard of morality from. And if you can't prove the law of morality, then we're on the same playing field. And I would argue I can prove that the God of the Bible exists because I'm a full preterist. So I believe that since, let's say 1500 BC, God was speaking about the destruction of the second temple and it happened. I would say that that's very compelling evidence of it, but I won't even go to that level. Let's say neither of us can prove our point. Then we're still stuck at, where do you derive your moral and ethics from?
Okay, I'm gonna make this kind of short because I am being, not we, I am being very disrespectful to A's and to James by coming in here and taking over this stream, which is exactly what I told A's I wasn't going to do last time I was on here. I just really wanted to address a point which has not been addressed yet, which is where objective.
Yeah, don't worry. You're not taking over the stream. You're doing exactly what the point of the stream is, which is to have a conversation about important topics. So you're not doing anything wrong. I don't want you to think that.
Right. And it's what God made you do, so you're kind of off the hook.
Right. Yeah, exactly. So, feel free to, make your case. And I know you had questions for us that haven't been answered, but, feel free to continue this conversation with truth.
I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate people's patience in the chat and anyone who watches A's Philosophy channel. I understand, like I've told A's before, and I've said it on the live stream, so if you can always refer to any of the comments, but I'm not here to deconvert A's followers or to cause a bunch of drama with A's channel or anything like that. So I do try to be mindful of that. Just really quick.
That would be funner.
Well, honestly, here's the thing. I don't care for followers. I really care more about having conversations that lead to people getting closer to the truth. So I'm not worried about the viewers and their feelings. You're the ones on the panel, so you all go ahead and have the conversation you want.
Ace, just as a side note, and I'm probably going to lose track of what I was going to say to the brother here, but as a side note, because I do try to be respectful, as you know, despite some of the mud that flies my way, I do try to be respectful and have integrity with the way I deal with you and other people. And I was worried about taking over your live stream, but I did happen to notice when I was looking for some of your other content to watch that the videos, and this is not about me, this is about the content that we're providing together and with everybody else, but the videos that I've been a part of have like 3 to 10 times more views, at least over the last several months, if not year. So maybe the drama is what people on your channel are looking for. I don't know, as a side note. Maybe I'm doing you a huge favor right now. But at any rate,
it could be. Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Yeah, so go ahead.
Okay, so just really quick to close this up. Truth, I don't know if you are familiar. You mentioned you're a full preterist. There is a gentleman named Tristan Gabriel, who's actually, I'm going to call him a friend of mine. We just recently met, but we just get along really well, have a lot of mutual respect for each other. He has a channel called 21st Century Minds, and I just like to plug that video that I just did on his channel, A's, if you don't mind. But I'd really like to have you post that link in the chat as well. It's something that I mentioned to you in that email I sent you. I really want you to watch that because I do think that there's a lot to be said for that. The discussion I was going to have on his channel was supposed to be about the origins of atheism and agnosticism, something I've studied a lot about. But we ended up talking about some very interesting things that I would really be interested in your feedback about. We touched on something I know you're going to dig me about because you and I have talked about transcendental things I've pushed back on, but I did talk about a supernatural experience in there. We talked about geopolitics and religion. I mean, we touched on a lot of things. We touched a little bit on the debate that I had, a little post debate. So I think you'll find that video very interesting. I give my word, it's pretty interesting. But the reason that I bring him up is not just to plug that, but is because when you mentioned full preterism, I don't know if you know 21st Century Minds channel or if you know about Tristan Gabriel, but he did a debate against the great Don Preston, who you must know if you know about full preterism. And so Tristan, they just did a debate about full preterism on his channel. He wasn't a part of that one, and neither was Don Preston, but he's done a huge deep dive into this, And I'm not going to get into full preterism right now because as far as I'm concerned, there are a number of problems with when it comes to reading double prophecies and double interpretations of prophecies and all this other stuff that I completely throw out the window. I just hand wave it away. You person's got to give me an actual reason, a good argument to why I would believe there's a double fulfillment of a prophecy. And that's just such a crazy claim to me. But I understand
I don't think full preterism claims that. I don't know a single full preterist that would say there's double fulfillment of prophecy.
Well, I've seen the arguments made from full preterists. So I would encourage you to look into Tristan Gabriel's channel. The debate that he had against Don Preston is actually on Derek from Myth Vision's channel.
Yeah,
but anyway, if you're a full preterist, if you're a full preterist, I would just you might find that interesting anyway.
Well, the preterists got really mad at Tristan. They got really angry.
Yeah. I'm super aware of Tristan Gabriel, and I don't even know why you would bring him up, because he makes your argument even worse, because he's just an agnostic. So he's even worse off, because again, where does he derive his morality from, number one? And number two, his entire problem with full preterism is destroyed by covenant creation. So once you realize Genesis chapters 1-3 is not about literal physical creation, but about covenant creation, his whole theology falls apart. So it's like he's not even. Yeah.
Well, you can. I mean, first of all, I'm an agnostic as well. I'm actually a true agnostic. Tristan, I would say, is an agnostic deist, but that's just, you can learn about those definitions of those terms if you watch that video, because I did talk about the definitions of agnosticism and atheism in that video, and those words do actually mean something, and the agnosticism or atheism is a very blanket or umbrella term that covers many different competing ideas. So just saying that's what I mentioned here in this video when A's was talking about atheists don't believe in that consciousness continues after death, and that actually flies in the face of what Buddhism teaches, and Buddhists are technically atheists. So when we use these terms as umbrella terms, we're really not doing a service, for communication, in my opinion. But that's neither here nor there. I am a true agnostic. But where Tristan and I get our morality from, I can't speak for Tristan. He would have to answer that question himself. You obviously are well aware of my position, even though you clearly disagree with it, which is fine. And I would just say in closing here, because I'm going to turn this over to James and you and A's, and I might sit around for a little bit if I have something to offer, but I really want you guys to have your time here. But if you want to have a real long discussion about this or whatever, I do plan on getting together with A's and having him really grill me on my viewpoint, because that post-debate video, they were talking about termites and all this kind of crazy stuff, and I was trying to deal with 4 or 5 different people coming at me at a time, and mentally I can only really, out of respect for the argument being made, focus on 1, maybe 2 people at a time. So when I'm not so distracted and don't have so much going on, I'd like to give it its full attention, and maybe we can come back onto this channel, or I know other people that host channels that have said they would platform me, and we can have these discussions. But I would close by saying you still haven't done anything, in my opinion, to explain how this is objective, the standard you're coming at is objective, nor have you connected the dots to morality and what we understand morality to be, being meat puppets and stuff. Morality is irrelevant at that point. So I just think there's a lot, when you go back and watch this, that you're just adding factors into this that don't even meet the terms of how we would use those words, and it just don't understand how you're connecting all those dots. And I mean no disrespect when I say that.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's okay. It's interesting because I guess I would argue, even within the Bible itself, I don't think you find the actual term of morality, right? Like there's no word for morality, and even if you want to argue, but there is a word for morals, it's not really. The the way that the Greek words parse out and the Hebraic words parse out, it doesn't really mean morals. And really you would only find an argument for the word morality in the Greek, which is interesting because in Hebraic thought, it's not even a concept. But even in the Greek, again, when you look at the etymology of any word that they would try and say is moral, it's just kind of more of a transliteration, because morality is not just like the word fair. The word fair doesn't exist in the Bible. Like there's no Bible verse that says, well, this is fair or that's unfair. So it really does, it does require some understanding of the narrative that the Bible is telling. And that's why I say it goes back to no free will. It's all been predetermined by God. And so when we look at this morality equation that you're bringing up here, we still are on the same playing field. And when you're saying that nobody's provided any evidence to show the objective part of it, I would then go back to, but if I break into your house, blow your family's heads off, right? Unalive them in front of you, and then the police show up, who's there's a law of like judicial law that's in play there, and I would be found guilty under judicial law, but under what moral standard would I be actually doing anything wrong? And that's like I was on that guy Breakfast Tacos channel, and he kind of brought up the same thing. He's like, well, really Buddhists, they're atheists, but this and that. And then they brought up the definition of religion, right? But I just pushed back and said, well, no, I don't agree with that definition of religion. I think that everybody has a religion, because all the word religion really means is a structure that you adhere to. So my structure that I adhere to is the God of the Bible. Your structure that you adhere to happens to not be the God of the Bible, versus a Buddhist who is under the tenets of Buddhism. But if any one of us were to step outside of that box of our standard of how we live, we would no longer be that thing. And that's why I believe everything can be broken into a composite of quote unquote religion. Because if you, objective ethics, woke up tomorrow and said, I actually believe in the Prophet Muhammad and in Allah, you would no longer be a non-deist agnostic. You would be a Muslim. And then you've got tenets of that Muslim religion of Islam that you must follow. If you step outside of them, you break that, and then you become, maybe you go back to being an agnostic, or you know what I mean? So that I brought that up, and the people at Breakfast Tacos didn't really have any way to talk about that, because it just kept going back to the Webster's dictionary definition, but I'm bringing in a whole concept, not just a definition.
I guess objective ethics is taking a break.
Yeah, that's all right. If we both had our closing.
Okay. Well, truth, you and I have disagreed a lot on this channel before, and unfortunately, I'm going to say that your basically approach to Christianity and the Bible, I find myself actually agreeing more with objective, personally. I mean, not that I think you're both wrong, essentially, at the end of the day. When your determinism, like, how does that make sense to you, that God is determining all this? Like how does that moral? How do morals exist in a world where everything's predetermined?
Well, that's the whole point. Like, again, the word morality doesn't appear in the Bible, but the concept is there, because you've got good and evil. That's really what morality boils down to. And that's where I get my standard from. I can point and say, look here in the Bible, God gives a standard for morality, versus whatever objective ethics was trying to say. There's no proof. There's a lot of hypothecating around it. Don't get me wrong. And that's fine, but we're both at the same level. If he wants to say you can't prove God, I can say, but you can't prove your law of morality. So then we need to start looking at other avenues of how to get our point across. And again, I can derive my standard from the book, whereas you cannot derive the standard of morality outside of that, because it just there is no good or evil outside of, I believe, what God is decreeing. And when it comes to being like a hardcore full-on determinist, it still is all according to God's will. Like Adam didn't have the choice to be created out of the dust of the earth, right? It just happened.
Yeah, but I hear what you're saying, but
did the heavens and earth have a will to say that they're going to be created
no,
in
but
verse 1?
but humans are the idea is humans are created with wills, or beings with wills. Like that's part of their nature, is how they've been created by God, or how we want to look at it.
But you
So,
can't find that in the Bible. You can't find where
you can't say, you can't find what exactly,
like where it says, "Oh, we are created with a nature that has will." You know what I mean?
Well, again, it's like the concept of, you're just saying I guess there's no word for morality in the Bible. Is that what you were saying?
Right. Like there's no word. The word free will doesn't appear in the Bible. It arguably appears once in the Old Testament when it's talking about an offering that one had to make that didn't have to do with, sin or damage or, damage to personal property or anything like that. They could just do it because they wanted to. But
yeah. So if you have a free will offering, doesn't that imply that we have free will?
But that's the thing. It's because of the circumstances surrounding the offering that it was just done just because. But free will is more like we have our own, like in the sense of what you're trying to apply it to as a nature of humanity. It's like we are forging our own path, where I just don't believe that. The Bible says, God decreed everything, the beginning and the end from the end from the beginning.
But it says God declares the beginning from the end. Does that mean that's the same thing as God decreeing and determining everything from the beginning to end?
Well, yeah, I would say absolutely, because if it doesn't happen that way, then God was wrong, and then we don't have a God of the Bible.
Well, I mean, God can declare something, but that doesn't mean he's determining it. And if things change, God will declare whatever it is that ends up coming to pass, right? Like, so
well, what about like Jesus's crucifixion? Like, is it possible Jesus could have never been crucified then, in your opinion?
Oh yeah. I don't believe in the atonement. So yeah, so that's the thing. That's the thing. This is what I do on my channel. Is try to understand. If you get your Christianity wrong, you're gonna get downstream. You're gonna have all these different views. Well, if you probably think that Christ needed to die for the sins of mankind, and that's not even what Jesus Christ taught.
I'm not even bringing that argument. That's not the argument.
Okay.
It's just
so,
we've got like the Psalms and Isaiah that talk about this happening, but you're saying it's a possibility that it could have never happened.
Yeah. I mean, well, God, there are actually points in the Bible where God says, this or that could happen, and it depends on what people choose to do. So yeah, God could prophesy Christ dying, and then if people had repent, I think that basically, my opinion is I'm an open theist, so personally, and I believe that, but I believe that because God, again, the skeptic's going to be like, it's all fairy tale. But for me, based on my understanding of what I think makes the most sense, given the existence of God and the existence of free will and how the universe operates, I think that God can very accurately predict what's going to happen, but he can't know with ontological certainty that this or that is going to happen. So, I think God can probably predict what I'm going to do tomorrow, but God doesn't know what I'm going to do until I actually do it. Okay. So, God could, send down a prophecy about, Ace philosophy is going to do this tomorrow. And, it probably will happen, but that is the result of God just knowing me so well that God could predict that. It's not that God, I think there is like a 0.00000 repeating 1% chance that something else could have happened, or something slightly different could have happened.
Sorry, I was drinking water. It's
interesting. Yeah, you're
good. Here's what I would say, right? Like A's philosophy wakes up in the morning and you shuffle out over into your kitchen, you open the cupboard and you see Cheerios and then you see Fruity Pebbles, right?
Yeah.
And you're thinking to yourself, you're like, all right, I'm going to go with the Fruity Pebbles. And
Right.
in your mind, you're thinking that's a free will choice of, okay, Fruity Pebbles. But in reality, that's just like a preference that you have. And I don't know if that necessarily was something that you free will chose. I don't know. Like that's kind of like how I think.
Well,
Well, you
your
have a
will, right? Exactly. Your will does what your preference is. So that is what your will is. It's your preference. So the idea is that your free will is free to do what you're willing to do. So you're always going to will what you prefer to do. That doesn't refute free will. I've heard people make this that your choices are based on your preferences. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Your preferences are, and you choose what you want to do.
Would you say
And I
your
think
preferences are formed by the society or the environment in which you grow up?
they are perhaps, but they are also under your autonomous control. So yeah, people can be brainwashed to think this and the other to determine their actions, but ultimately, what brainwashing is, it's the basically people influencing you to use your will a certain way. Okay, so they manipulate human nature to accomplish a certain end. All right. So, and these things unfortunately happen. And obviously the skeptic's going to say religion is a form of brainwashing, but there are other forms of brainwashing that are entirely like, it's like when anytime you can, there's military brainwashing, there's covert operations brainwashing, there's all these different ways of brainwashing people, even when they're mature adults. But what it really is basically utilizing the understanding of the human mind to get people to do what they want you to do. And yeah, so you are still using your own free will, but it's because your free will has been basically programmed by someone else.
Free. Well, you say so. Could your free will be programmed by God?
No, it couldn't,
Oh,
because
come on, A's. You
it
throw me
can't
a bone here.
it can't be determined by God. So I mean,
Mm.
like you could say in a way, what really is brainwashing, what it is convincing someone to do something that you want them to do at the end of the day. So God reveals things to us. God influences us in various ways through the prophets. You could kind of actually call that brainwashing, but the point is that, like, let's think about Jesus Christ. I guess you could say the point of God sending Jesus Christ to us is because God wanted to brainwash us that the things that Jesus was saying are true. And if they are true, there's nothing wrong with quote unquote brainwashing someone into believing that. Like, you can brainwash someone to believe the truth. So we can't ignore that, which is a good thing.
Right.
But
Right.
um, but yeah, where were we? Oh yeah, so free will. Anyway, we were talking about free will. Yeah, the idea that our free will is based on our preferences. Okay, yeah, that's fine. It's still we could have done otherwise at the end of the day. Like, if our will had been something else, we could have done. If I wanted the Cheerios instead of the frosted in front of the Frosted Flakes or the Fruit Loops, I would have chosen them.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
to me, morality requires that we be able to, make a decision one way or the other. If something is being determined, okay, by God or by the forces of nature, then morality is impossible. All right. So this is why atheism, materialistic atheism, the time that says it's just matter and energy floating around in space according to laws of physics, there obviously can't be free will there, but it's no different. If God has predetermined literally everything that comes to pass, like the Westminster Confession of Faith says, then there technically is no morality there either.
Yeah. I think that's my point, though. What I said, you don't really, you don't find the word morality in the Bible. I think the concept derives from good and evil, and how do you define it, and that's the morality. But yeah, I mean, I think I've heard you have the argument with Ace Theo before too, because that's like the only thing that me and him would agree on is no free will. But
Yeah, I mean, I find the no free will thing to, like James was saying earlier, like, if there's no free will, then I've been determined to make an argument against free will. So it's just kind of all
Mhm.
circular and repeating. But to me, I think the Bible does teach that people have free will and that we can do otherwise. I think there's a number of biblical verses that support that. But also, like, I agree with James and Objective that I don't see the Bible as being a foundation for truth itself. I think that the truth is beyond the Bible. The Bible just points us to truth. Okay, so I don't use the Bible to prove anything. What I use the Bible to is to say that this is something that's being claimed and needs to be analyzed and investigated. It's evidence, but I would never say that the Bible proves anything that I believe. I wouldn't use it to establish that argument, except that maybe something happened in history, like Jesus existed or something. But when it comes to like kind of more philosophical ideas, like the Bible doesn't, like, let's just say the idea that Jesus is God. Let's just, like, I don't believe Jesus is God. I'm a Unitarian. But even if the Bible did say that Jesus was God, well, I would have to say that, let's just, like some people look at the prologue of John, the Word was God, the Word was with God, and all that. Okay, it doesn't prove that Jesus is God. It's a claim that can be believed or not believed. I think it needs to be reinterpreted personally. So I think that your approach, your presuppositionalism, kind of forces you into this kind of narrow ideal way of analyzing truth claims, and I think it's kind of self-inhibiting personally. But I think you do it to yourself, Truth. I think that you prefer to look at things a certain way, and so that's why you need to change your preferences. I don't know what it is emotionally, psychologically. Is it so? For a lot of Christians, it's the need for assurance of what they believe when it comes to the Bible. They want to have certainty. They want to dwell on this idea their
Right.
salvation is assured or something. I don't know what it is for you, but
I mean, yeah, it's definitely like I've even said before, if full preterism isn't true, then I don't think I could be a Christian, like I've just found what I truly firmly in my heart believe is the truth. And if that were to be shattered, then yeah, it would be detrimental to my faith,
Well, it could be that your understanding of what constitutes true Christianity could be flawed. I mean, wouldn't that also be a possibility?
That if what? I'm sorry.
Instead of Christianity being false, it's really just your understanding of Christianity that would be false, right?
Well, it would have to be my. So that's the thing, though. Full preterism is a framework. So if the framework fails, that means that full preterism fails. And if full preterism fails, then my faith would be it'd be very detrimental to my faith, I feel like, because I personally cannot make sense of the Bible outside of full preterism.
Can I ask a question here real quick?
Go ahead.
So when it comes to the Bible, and I know A's doesn't have this issue because, which another thing I'd love to do one time is come on your channel and find out exactly what books or what passages or what prophets, what you discard and what you accept of the Bible. But for Mr. Truth, if I could point out numerous contradictions in the Bible, are you a biblical literalist to the degree that everything in the Bible is true? Because I guarantee you right now, I could point out a number of contradictions that cannot be harmonized.
Yeah, I would say that literally every jot and tittle of the Bible is true.
Do you mind if I hit you with one just to see how you respond to it?
Mm-hmm.
I know you didn't come here, with your boxing gloves on, so I appreciate if you need to just say I'll look at that later. But for just one example, in Genesis 6:3, the flood narrative, God specifically tells Moses that he doesn't want to deal with man forever because he's tired of dealing with people, so he's going to restrict man to live for 120 years. And then right in Genesis 25:7, Abraham lives to 175 years old. These are direct contradictions that just can't be harmonized.
Yes. So this is one of those things where we're looking at like a generalization.
Because what verse is it in Genesis, Objective? The first one you mentioned?
Start with Genesis chapter 6. I believe it's verse 3. I'm doing this from memory. I just had this debate not too long ago, so I might be wrong, but I believe it's in chapter 3. Yeah, 120 years. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so then the Lord said, "My spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he also is flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years." Okay.
So this is a very specific. This is not general. This is a very specific statement. And then you go to Genesis 25. and it's at the beginning, the first half of Genesis 25. I want to say maybe 5, 6, or 7, somewhere in there. So let's start. Let's just scroll, and I can see. Oh, there you go, right there. 175 years for Abraham.
Well, I mean, yeah, but even in Genesis 9:28, it says that Noah lived to be like 900 years old.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter because he was already over 120 years old when God gave that decree. So it wouldn't apply to Noah. It was just everybody after the flood, and Abraham obviously came after the flood.
Right, yeah. But yeah, when we're looking at this is again another idea of what the covenant language of God is, because the whole point of Genesis 6 is that God is seeing wickedness upon the land. Now, the other thing too is I don't believe it's a global flood, so I'm just going to say that right now. But I do see that what God is talking about is on the generalization of the inhabitants of the land that were not in a covenantal standing with God. That would be their kind of like the cap line of their lifespan, whereas obviously Abraham was in a covenant standing with God.
So you have, and I mean no disrespect here, but you've added so much context that completely flies in the face of the passages itself. The author that wrote that had absolutely no intention of what you're putting into the text. That's just no way you could read that into the text unless you have to, because that's not what either one of those passages infers or says. There's just nothing in there that says it's about a covenant, and there's absolutely nothing in there that says it's a generalization. It says man will not. I will limit the days of men. That's all men. If you're going to say there's specific men, you have to show me the texts that say that. Otherwise, you're just simply doing what apologists do. Every time I have this debate with them, they hand wave away anything that's an actual contradiction without any evidence that it's actually not a contradiction. So I appreciate your argument, but there's no reason I would take anything you just said seriously. That's a direct contradiction. Well, yeah, you cannot die at 120 years old and live to 175. That's impossible. It's a logical contradiction.
I understand. So when we look at, well, first of all, you have to look at the Bible, especially if we're talking like the Old Testament, through a Hebraic lens, because it was written by Jews. The whole Bible written by Jews, okay? But specifically Old Testament stuff like this is talking from a very particular Hebraic mindset. And if you look here, the word that's used in verse 3 for man is ba'adam, which would be referencing back to the man that was made in the image of God of Genesis 1:26, which is Adam, which is covenant creation, right? So what God is saying,
we are made in Adam's image.
No, the creation of
Adam. We are made in the likeness of Adam and Eve. That's so when you go back to the creation, Adam is made in God's image, and we are made in Adam's image.
All right, let me give a crack at it. Well, I actually, okay, Truth and Telos, finish making your point, and then I do have my own ideas about this that I want to kind of run by objective to see what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. So when it says that man will be made in our image, right, in Genesis 1, the thing is that word is Adam. It's completely, it's like a complete different idea versus when you're thinking about like a human, right? Because human is like a categorization, but the Adam is that covenant creation. So when we're seeing here what's being talked about in verse 3, the Ba'adam, God is saying, and this is how the verb tenses render out. He says, "My spirit doth not strive in man to the age. In their erring, they are flesh." So look at what he said here. That my spirit will not strive with man, like it will not be within them to the age, because why? They were transgressing this covenant. They're in their erring, so they were doing things wrong. They are in their flesh. They're being fleshly. So then that's a separation. God's saying, so now because of that, their days have been 120 years. And that could just be like, again, a Hebraism. 120 years dead stop? Probably not. but the idea is there of a great reduction of life, of a lifespan. And yet we see Abraham was the one that was called out of the Ur of the Chaldees to be in a covenantal status with God. So that therefore, yeah, it would make sense that he lives a long time and his descendants, and even the people after the flood up until Abraham, God had covenantal relationships with people up till Abraham. So I don't see this as a contradiction at all. It's just you need to understand Hebraic thought and what the message is trying to be brought across here.
Well,
Ace, did you have anything before? Yeah, go ahead, Ace. Let's hear have you give a crack at it.
Well, you respond to what he just said since he just spoke, so I don't want to,
Well, my response is that he literally just hand waved it away and put a bunch of stuff into the text that's not there. The same term can be used, was used for our being in the image of Adam. This was, there's nothing in the text that breaks off and says after Adam committed the sin that he's no longer an Adam. There's nothing in there. And then he never offered a Hebrew word for what is a person being created in the image that doesn't use the word Hadam. So it's just literally just a lot of hand waving away what's actually written in the text. And telling me that you have to put yourself in their mindset. Do they not know what 120 years is? I mean, at what point, you know what I mean? He's looking at the Bible as though it's this one cohesive book, but the Bible is not. You've got 66 books in his Bible, I assume, written by numerous authors with a theology that changes and is being reinterpreted all the time, just like preterism.
A theology that changes, really?
Oh yeah, Ace talks about it all the time. Other Christians talk about it. You've got Trinitarians, you've got Unitarians. I mean, none of you guys actually agree on these interpretations.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't change the context of the book. Like the words are what they are, and that's
exactly the words are what they are. That's exactly what I'm saying. I'm glad we agree.
But let me ask you something. If you don't believe in Hebraic mindset, in Isaiah chapter 13, God says in verse 10 that the stars of the heavens and their constellations cause not their light to shine. Darkened hath been the sun in its going out, and the moon causeth not its light to come forth. Do you believe that that's literal? Like when Isaiah was writing that, he was being literal about that kind of cosmological event?
I have no idea. I have not looked into that passage. I do know that Isaiah knows exactly what a young woman is, and I know that Matthew doesn't know what a virgin is, or doesn't think Isaiah knows what a virgin is.
Okay, so that passage in Isaiah 13 is God speaking through Isaiah, speaking about the Medo-Persian army coming upon Babylon and throwing down their kingdom. So when that kingdom was thrown down by an invading force, that was the stars of the heavens and their constellations causing not their light to shine. And that was the moon and sun being darkened and not having their light go out. So it's not literal. The words on the page are what they are.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you. There's lots of things. There's lots of metaphorical things that are written in the Bible. And that's why you have to understand.
Genesis 6:3 different?
That's why you have to realize what the context of everything is, but that doesn't mean that there isn't anything that you could take literally either. It doesn't mean you just interpret things however you want them. But go ahead, Ace.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt, Objective. I absolutely agree. What full preterism has to do is, because not everything is consistent, they have to reinterpret things very liberally, sometimes in the complete contrary to what the words actually mean on the page. And yeah, I actually agree with Objective that when you can just take any word and make it mean anything you want, then it essentially does become meaningless. And it just becomes a self-fulfilling aspect of your own belief system as opposed to something that's just true on its own. So I kind of agree with Objective on that, but I also believe in some aspects of of Truth and Tealis's answer to this question. If we were to take this verse super duper literally, then every single person on earth would live to 120 years old. Like no one would die before that age, no one would die after that age, because the verse very strictly says that the days of man shall be 100, and I assume that means people, as in women as well. I mean, maybe that's not a fair assumption, but I think that is something that's probably implied. If you just read this verse as it actually is stated, then every single person on earth will live to be 120 years, no more, no less. And obviously, I just don't think that that kind of strict interpretation is warranted. I know there's a lot of places in the Bible where it says like God owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. Okay, well, is it exactly 1,000 hills? Obviously not. There's more than 1,000 hills on this earth with cattle on them. So there are places in the Bible where a number is stated, and obviously it doesn't mean there are obviously people who said there are places where the Bible says all people were doing something, but it clearly can't mean all people. The Calvinists do a good job of demonstrating that, even though they take it too far in some specific instances. So my view of this verse is that yes, okay, if you to take this verse extremely literally, exactly as stated, then yes, there is a contradiction. But it seems to me that something of what Truth and Telos was saying, it seems to me that it's basically saying there will be a reduction of the lifespan of humans to about 120 years, which is actually still kind of what it is today. Like the longest humans live to about 120 years or so. And obviously not everyone lives that long, but that's, about as, if you look at the oldest people on earth, that's about how far they get. So I think that this is probably, and obviously there are some people who live somewhat longer. I think that, I don't know who the oldest person on earth right now, but I would probably venture to guess it might be, I don't know. I'm not going to make a guess, but I know that there probably have been people who've been documented to go over 120. And at the time of Abraham, maybe conditions were a little better. He might have lived. But I just think that it's basically a generalized reduction in the lifespan of humanity to about 120 years. So I'll give you, let me just finish, Objective. I know you're trying to jump in. Yes, if you take the verse extremely strictly literally as it's stated, there is a contradiction. But if you take it according to this basically a concept of the lifespan of humans will be 120 years, more or less, which I think is much more just logically consistent with just reality of what's trying to be said here. I think that's kind of the better way to go about it.
I would respond by saying two things. First of all, as an agnostic and as a skeptic, I would just look at it for what it is and say, yeah, you know what? There are a lot of numbers that are thrown out in the Bible that are wrong, and there's a lot of concepts that are demonstrably false. That's obvious. In order to get away from that, you have to reinterpret them to not mean what they actually meant, and to say that, well, they were implying things, and I just don't have a need to do that because I'm not a believer. The other thing I would say is that it actually, in many ways, not many ways, in other interpretations, it does do a better job of clarifying this, in my opinion. Well, I don't know if I should say better. That's not necessarily fair. There are other ways it's been clarified, and it does say, shall not live more than, and there's other ways it's written. However, even if you take this particular one that you brought up and use a real world example, because I think the real world understanding is to take it for what it means, is so when you have a conversation with people, I've been on your channel many times, you are very polite and you give people a final word and you say, limit your time to, a couple of minutes. You're not meaning that your time will be a couple of minutes. You're saying do not exceed X amount of minutes. You're kind of, that's the implication of what you're meaning. You're not saying that your time will be exactly X number of minutes. You're saying, I want you to limit your time to X number of minutes. Do not go beyond this time. And that's exactly how anybody would read this, because that's how we talk. That's how we communicate. And that's how they communicated back then, in my opinion.
Bruce, it looks like you had something to say.
Well, yeah, I would just kind of say, really, when we look at, again, it's funny. It almost be like say, okay, imagine in like 2,000 years, somebody stumbles across like lyrics to an NWA song, right? And they're gonna look at that and they're gonna be like, oh, well, this means this or that, and I'm going because that's my understanding of the way that things are right now. So what you're doing in objective is you're taking your own mindset in the 21st century where we've got air conditioning, we've got Uber Eats, we've got iPhones, we've got the internet. I got a computer next to me that's got a 5080 RTX. It can do this, it can do that. I've got AI, and you're trying to apply it to a very, very primitive, first of all, language. Hebrew is very primitive as a language. And second of all, it's just a very primitive text. Like when we're looking at the concepts that are being derived from this, they're very deep concepts, but it's a very primitive mindset written by a very primitive people. And so I would say that it's almost like not, I would say it's not being true to the text. Whereas what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to put my mind in this Hebraic mindset that, like, for example, there is no such thing as individual identity in Hebraic mindset. Okay. This is, it was all a corporate identity. And I would imagine that it was a very common thing back then, where it was just corporate identity. Like, you were an Egyptian, you were part of the corporate body of Egypt, and so this is how they thought back then. The same concept applies for what kind of message is being taught when we're reading Genesis. Again, I think that God is all about dividing things out. If you read the first chapter of Genesis, it's literally God dividing things out like infinitely. He's like, okay, so we're going to divide this and this, and then we're going to divide this and this, and it's going to create that. Then this and this and that is going to be divided out. And so God is all about just structuring things and dividing them out. So what he's doing here in Genesis chapter 6 is no different. He's taking that same concept, the good and the bad, he's dividing it, structuring it out. And then you've got the flood, which I believe was a localized flood. Okay, it was contained to the ancient Near East. It flooded that area. Then God's got a new clean slate to work with, and he's now redividing things out with Noah. And what happens with his sons? They have bloodlines. And what happens to those people? And in Genesis chapter 10, you've got the table of nations. God is divvying them out again, saying this is where they're going. And then you've got the Tower of Babel. What happens? God fractures it. He divvies it out. Like, I mean, this is kind of what I would argue is that you need to approach it. It's impossible, I think, for a true 100%, like giving it your best shot understanding, if you're not giving a if you're not looking at it through that lens. And the other thing I wanted to say, and then I'm actually going to bow out because I don't want to take up too much time. But the other thing I wanted to say is, even Paul says in the letter to the Thessalonians that the faith is not for everybody. Okay, so the way that it's in 2 Thessalonians chapter 3 verse 2, he says that we may be delivered from the unreasonable and evil men. So again, that's the dividing out. Let's separate the unreasonable and evil people from us, for the faith is not of all. So it's not for everybody. You know what I mean? That's the other thing I would say. You could look at the Bible and have 50 different reasons as to why not, and ultimately it falls right back onto that predetermined thing. It's just not for everybody.
Yeah, I would agree with you to that on that point, that it's certainly not for everybody. I would, and I know you want to go here, so I just want to, just say real quick before you go, so I'm not throwing shade on you when you're not here to defend yourself if you choose to. And again, I'm not trying to be rude to you. So if I'm speaking curtly, or, if you feel I'm being disrespectful, I do apologize for that, because that's not my intention. My intention is to, bring up a point and then argue for my claim, and then have you argue for your claim as gentlemen, So I hope you realize that. As far as the flood goes, you don't have to convince me it wasn't a global flood. I know for a fact it wasn't a global flood. However, the Bible does think it's a global flood. It's quite clear when you actually read the Bible. But if you're not going to take things literally, then you can read whatever you want into it. As far as what you said, though, I think it's very interesting, because it's a bit of a straw man to try to compare poetry and the literary genre of poetry, and whether we take things literally or metaphorically, to what's clearly to be written as history. This is not a metaphorical language that's being used. So I don't think that analogy works at all. Maybe you have a different analogy you want to use than your Nine Inch Nails or whatever band I can't remember whatever band you talked about, whatever music thing you talked about. But music is a form of, whatever it is. That's just as bad as far as I'm concerned. I'm too old for any of that stuff. But at any rate, the other thing I would say, it's very interesting to me that your defense for your position of interpretation is essentially that these Israelites were so stupid that God couldn't clearly say anything about the covenant that you're talking about in this passage. He couldn't clarify anything about the fact that he's talking about specific people as opposed to not just all men in general. I mean, the whole thing just falls completely flat, because how stupid do you think these people actually were that God had to dummy this up into such a generic term that people who actually are a little bit more intelligent in the future would look at this and be so confused? I mean, who's this book being written for? You know, it makes the whole argument to me makes no sense whatsoever.
Okay. Well, what was the first thing that you said? Oh yeah,
There was definitely there was no global flood, but the Bible says there was a global flood.
Right. Yeah. So it's funny that you mentioned that, because in Acts chapter 2, it says in verse 5, and there were dwelling in Jerusalem Jews, devout men from every nation of those under the heaven. And it's the exact same language that's used when it's talking about the flood, that the flood waters came and raised up all of the mountains under the heaven. So this is just it's localized, bro. The whole Bible.
I agree with you 100% that they thought that the world was very small. I totally agree with that. Unfortunately, the verbiage is that every animal from the entire face of the earth, all the mountains were covered. Where would that water go scientifically? We could say that a local doesn't match this.
Objective. Listen. The Bible is very clear that it's a localized event.
No,
and
I'm reading. Let's look at it right here. It's Genesis 7:19. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. So how do you get that being a localized flood?
Because when it uses the word ares there for like earth, the problem is it comes down to the same issue. You know, the word earth to refer to what we know as the globe only began being called earth in like the 1600s. To somebody who was writing this in 2000 BC, the word ares just means like the land, and it's a very confined geological space, because they had no idea that there was an India or a China or a Russia or a South America, or you know what I mean? So it's a very localized thing. And again, when it says everywhere under the heavens, it's the same language used in Acts chapter 2, out of every nation of those under the heaven. It's just talking about this localized area.
You're right about that. They did have no idea. They also thought the earth was flat, which is why they referred to it as being able to go up on the highest mountain and seeing every kingdom in the universe on the earth. They did have this idea because they were very primitive, which is how we know this book was written by men and not inspired by a God that actually knew this thing was a sphere and that actually knew what the world meant.
So, preterist, let me ask you this. So you think that when it says that like everyone died, it basically like people in China and North America survived, but just people in the Near East. Like, so when it says there were 8 humans on the ark, everyone but those 8 humans in the Near East died, but elsewhere in like China, everywhere else, everyone survived. No one even knew there was a flood.
Correct, because and what Peter does in First Peter is he's drawing perfectly off of that, because he's drawing that same flood narrative to say in that same way that those 8 souls were saved, now we are saved, but through baptism. And he's talking in a localized sense. It's not like people were being baptized in North America at the time that Peter was writing First Peter. So it is a very, and I would actually argue, I don't know, First Peter, it's probably talking about water baptism because it's written to the Jews, and they're all about water baptism.
In Genesis 6:6 says the Lord was sorry that he had made man on the earth. So, I mean, that again, I'm agreeing with objective here. All that stuff you're importing about the mindset of the people not knowing that the earth would include things beyond they've actually seen with their own eyes. It's not saying that. The language is very clear that the God is judging all men. The earth was corrupt. It doesn't say only the Near East was corrupt. Like, this is what you do. You say you believe the Bible, but anytime you disagree with the Bible, you just ignore what it actually says and reinterpret it according to what you personally believe. So you can pick and choose and deny anything you want and say you still believe the Bible. Why not just say you don't believe the Bible? Like, because you clearly don't believe the Bible.
No, I 100% believe the Bible. I just think that it's the Bible.
You don't believe the
Okay.
Bible because the Bible says that how do
Okay.
you get water going above the mountains, above all the mountains, but it's somehow contained to a small geographic region in the Near East? Like what? How does that physically work in your mind? To where like is there like a little like a cylinder of water above the Near East that doesn't spread to like China, or how does this work?
Well, no, but if you look at it geographically, the ancient Near East is a perfect basin. So it's a constant deluge that's happening. It's not like the water stops at any point and the flood water is like still just like chilling still. It's a constant deluge that eventually lets up and then the water starts draining. And then you've got the peaks of the mountains coming back out. So if you look at it like topographically, it is very possible that this was in fact a localized event, and that these mountains that were being covered were because the constant deluge was filling up the tops of these mountains, and then it would be emptying out into this basin.
So
That you
it
have
says here, that the water prevailed 15 cubits higher in the mountains. So the water went above the mountains by 15 cubits.
Yep.
The highest
Yep.
mountain in the highest mountain in Turkey is Mount Ararat. So this would be the Near East. It's almost 17,000 feet in the air. So if you have an increase in the elevation of water for a number of days of 17,000 feet, that's not going to be possible in just a small area. That's going to cover the entire Earth. It's going to, I mean, a lot. There's very few places on Earth that are higher than even the Rocky Mountains. I don't think get that high. Or maybe they do in a couple places, but basically anywhere people live is certainly not going to be that high. So you can't just have a localized flood that goes 17,000 feet above the earth. That's several miles. It's not going to stay localized to the Near East when you're covering Mount Ararat, 17,000 feet. It just doesn't make sense. It's not physically possible. I mean, you're at least getting Europe and Africa and probably, I can't make, I mean, yeah, I would say you at least get like the Eurasian continent at that point.
Yeah, I would agree, because I do think that is part of the stage in which the Bible is set, right? Asia Minor into Europe and down into Northern Africa. So I think that it's possible still that happened.
It is physically absolutely impossible to cover any mountaintop with water on Asia anywhere and not have that water run off into the ocean and raise. This is insane. I can't believe what I'm
hearing.
Sure,
that's what I'm saying. I agree. It would have ran off into the ocean. Yeah, that's exactly what was happening with it.
But the problem
it would never build up. There's never enough resistance for it to build up to the top of the mountain in the first place. It would just be running off the whole time. This is just disconnected from physics at this point.
Yeah, so you have to basically ignore the laws of physics. You definitely have to ignore the language of the Bible where it says everywhere under the heavens. It doesn't say everywhere in the Near East, because I think that the Bible authors were aware that they knew what Ur was. They knew what Babylon was. They knew about Africa. They knew about Greece. They talk about these places in the Bible. They know what these words are. So they know.
Do an experiment in your own house just so you can see how fallacious and insane this argument is, and put something really tall in your bathtub and try and cover that with water without the rest of the bathtub filling up. Just try it one time and see how far you can get.
I understand, right? And again, I'm not a geophysicist or anything like that. So could I give you the exact science behind how Mount Ararat was like the top of it was flooded over? No, I don't think I could, but I can say that the language used there, I believe, is localized language. And is it because there's a basin, right? Like I said, water can fill up into a basin and then slowly drain out, but that'd be assuming like the bathtub, like let's say the really tall object it is below the rim of your bathtub, then the top of it could get covered. So I mean, I don't know. I'm just saying.
Not without filling the bathtub. And I'm partially agreeing with you, because the disconnect that you and I are having is that you think that because these people thought that the Earth was only a small part of a continent, which I agree with you, that is what they thought. That's not a problem there. The problem is that you guys are also trying to assume that God knew that the Earth is a sphere. And so the language they're using is the language of idiots who didn't know that the Earth was a sphere. And yet somehow this is the word of God who did know it's a sphere. The whole thing proves unequivocally that this was written by men who thought the Earth was not only flat, but who thought the Earth was a very small continent.
No, I
because they did think
disagree.
that was the world.
No, I think that they clearly, the language here, you have to ignore that it's saying that this is talking about the entire earth, whatever that may be. They may not specifically
No,
mention
no, that's not true. You have to accept what truth is saying, which I agree with, is that these people's understanding, just like he was saying before, when you have to put yourself into their shoes, the shoes of the author, you can't assume that they knew that because you think God knew that they actually knew. That's actually
well,
where your argument is falling.
the thing is, it says the earth. So even if they think the earth is flat, that still implies the entire earth and everything in it. It says it's so clear. Genesis 7:19, the water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens were covered. So it's just whatever their concept of the shape of the earth is, everything's being covered by the water here. And that doesn't say specifically just the places where the ancient Semitic peoples were. It says the entire earth. So the language does speak to an idea of the earth is more than just their local environment.
That's based off of your and I's modern understanding of the earth. What he was saying, as I said before, is true. Their understanding was completely different than ours. And you get this flat earth language in the Bible, which is why the significant majority of flat earthers today, which I can't even believe I'm saying we have people who think the earth is flat, but we do. And it just so happens most of them are Christians, King James onlyists in many cases, because of the language that's used in the Bible. You cannot go to the highest peak and look at all the kingdoms of the land. You cannot grab the earth by its skirt and shake it like a Job. I mean, these things are impossible on a sphere. So there's no flat earth. We all, hopefully, in this
I
room
understand.
understand.
I'm not saying. I understand. It doesn't even say the earth is flat here. It just doesn't. But look at what it
I didn't
says.
say it says that. I didn't say it says that. What I said is their understanding of this worldwide flood matches a flat earth. It matches a small area, because if they think that the sea, or eventually, or what we would say the Atlantic Ocean, ultimately, either way, was the border of the world, then they could just imagine that this would all fill up with water. It maps perfectly onto what I'm saying. You have to assume that they actually knew that God, or that God actually knew that future generations of people thousands of years later would say, well, we know the earth is a sphere, so therefore the whole earth had to be covered in water. And then you have to try and justify that, which of course nobody can, because it simply didn't happen. So this is the disconnect you guys are having with each other. I'm partially agreeing with him and partially agreeing with you, because I agree the text does clearly say the entire earth. It clearly says that. As far as you and I are concerned, we both agree on that. Where you and I disagree is that what they thought the entire earth was.
Well, again. I just unshared, but I'll read it here. Let me read it and share it again, real fast. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. All flesh that moved on the earth perished, birds and cattle and beasts and every swarming thing that swarms on the earth, and all mankind. So it doesn't say only localized people in a certain geographic area. All this language speaks to a universal idea of this flood, whether the earth is a flat or a spherical. It's covering everything. Now you can dispute that happened, but all I'm trying to establish is that it's clear. It's not saying it's a localized flood. Nowhere can you read this and think it's talking about anything besides every single thing on the earth is being covered by this, no matter how big the earth is.
Well, I agree with you. The language is a global flood. Like I said, we agree on that. Where we're disagreeing is what they thought the world was. That's the problem that we're having. But I agree with you 100% that the language is, and that gentleman, and again, I hate to throw shade on him when he's not here to defend himself, but this idea that you could fill fill up a continent and only cover Asia, and then say, well, I'm not a physicist or a geologist, so I can't make an argument for it, is because there's no argument to be made for a claim like that. That is, I come onto your channel, and I got, last time we had a debacle about this, and it's the only time that we really had a hot mess on your channel, because usually it's very polite, but I had like 4 or 5 Christians coming at me about this global flood thing, and you guys were all coming at it from different ideas. You thought there were mountains beforehand. Dirty Varmint was trying to push that nonsensical hydroplate theory. I asked him later, I says, how'd you get around the heat problem? We didn't have time to get into that. And he comes back by saying, oh, yeah, well, maybe the ocean would have raised 80 degrees. Do you know what the heat problem is, A's? Are you familiar with that argument?
Yeah,
from
I've heard
physicists.
it. I don't. I
Yeah.
think that.
So when you get the plate tectonics that would have been required, whether you think the Earth was a solid crust beforehand or not, is irrelevant. It doesn't affect the argument. At some point, the Earth opens up and it creates the plates, which we all know that we have now. We have the plates. Even the hydroplate theory says this is where the plates come from. What they avoid addressing, and what your version avoid, or the Christian's version avoids addressing, is the heat problem. Because when you have massive plate tectonic movement, rapid plate tectonic movement, you have a rapid rushing of what would be boiling water out if it's next to the core of the Earth, rushing out. You've got ice caps instantly melting. The amount of energy that you guys are trying to produce to get this global flood, according to physicists, people who actually know what they're talking about by science that we observe today, not looking back into something like you claim with evolution where we don't observe it. This is observable science. We know for a fact that that much energy would have absolutely incinerated the Earth. The Earth wouldn't even be here. The idea that you can launch enough material into outer space, I told him you can't create the asteroid belt with material from the Earth because of Newton's third law of motion. He had no answer to that other than to say that volcanoes put some material up in the atmosphere. That's not the same thing as what you're talking about here. When you launch the asteroids and the moon and the asteroid belt into outer space from the Earth, you get so much recoil and so much kickback. You didn't explain a solution to the heat problem, Dirty Varmint. You are on drugs right now. Go ahead and send that peer-reviewed article to a physicist if you've got your solution to the heat problem, because you haven't even heard what the heat problem is, because you obviously don't know, because your 80 degrees is nonsensical. The heat problem says the Earth would have been incinerated. It would have been like 100 and what do they say? The amount of energy that would have been produced from this, it would have been 10 to the 28th power joules. Okay, this is enough energy. So you think about the bomb in Hiroshima, how devastating that bomb was, how much energy that bomb put out, right? It literally cast people's shadows onto the wall. That's one bomb. The heat problem, okay, in order to get that much energy, it would be like 120,000 asteroids, each about 30 feet in diameter, all at the same time crashing onto the Earth. I mean, that would have incinerated the Earth. I mean, the whole thing is with physics, using actual physics, observable science that you guys hold on to so tightly, has debunked this flood thing so hard and so fast. And you don't even have to go to evolution. You don't have to go to geology and the strata layers and all the other sciences that disprove this. Just go to the physics alone. The heat problem, Answers in Genesis and Young Earth Creation Organization has put out a statement admitting they have absolutely no solution to the heat problem whatsoever. And so they call miracle. They're throwing in the towel and saying, well, it must have been a miracle. And they openly admit this. Go to their website. Check it out. I'm sorry, that was a tangent. But so this flood thing, then I know you got a guy I'm arguing with who thinks that you could fill up, 1/10 of his bathroom tub to cover an object, and it's not going to fill up the rest. This is just insane. The stuff that comes from some.
Yeah, I mean, I understand the frustration but just because this is something that skeptics bring a lot. There's so many different religions, so why can't God get us all on the same page? And also, even within religions, there are branches of religions. See, that's not God's fault. First of all, that people get things wrong. This is the thing about humans having free will. They can make up stories. They can reinterpret things according to their preferences. I mean, I've had preterists. He used to be called Professing Preterist. Now he's Truth and Telos Ministries. He has one of the strangest takes on every single thing. So I just want to let you know, I was not agreeing with pretty much almost anything of what he was saying. Like, as you can see, like he denied that there's free will, but he was trying to argue for morality. That's just a contradiction. I was trying to get to the point. That's just a contradiction in my view. Like, for morality to actually exist, there has to be a moral agent that's actually capable of just, choosing between good and evil. So if you're going to say at the outset that God is determining what we're doing, then that eliminates so he was arguing with you about morality, but then the foundation of his worldview is that God determines everything that happens, which means humans can't be moral, because to be moral means to make a choice between good and bad. So
you're absolutely right about that, Ace. You're absolutely right about that. The idea that you can have morality without free will, and then to fall back on, I understand now. I know exactly where his argument was going, because on the surface, that's completely illogical. That makes absolutely no sense. The whole thing makes no sense, in my opinion. But when he falls back to, well, we don't have morality in the Bible, we have good and evil. it's a word game he's trying to play by saying, well, that everything God does is good. Well, then you have to pin him down and say, well, what does good mean? You know, and how are you differentiating good from morality? And you know what I mean? So ultimately his argument falls apart, but you got to play a little bit of a word game with him there about definitions to get him there.
I've talked to professing pederasts about biblical matters, and he kind of does the same thing he was doing with you, and he will literally take a Bible verse and import so much meaning and so much extra material or ideas and concepts into it that he can basically just build, and he can deny the meaning of the words themselves and say they mean the opposite of what they really of what they actually say, because he'll draw it to some other part. And this is what I hate to say, this is what a lot of Christians do. They talk about context. What they really mean is they're finding some way to justify their beliefs. So this is why philosophy precedes the scriptures, because if your basic philosophy, a philosophical approach, isn't basically justified, then you're going to end up misinterpreting the Bible. Excuse me, the Bible, which is what I've always argued, is that words are not truth. You can't get truth from words. The words have to reflect some actual truth beyond them, which is why I disagree with presupposition. Truth in telos is a presuppositionalist. So it all kind of ties together. But we can kind of move. There are some other things I want to discuss with you in particular. I do want to answer your question that you had.
I agree. No, yeah, I didn't have any questions. I just want to say I agree with you on so much of what you said. And I do think this is the danger of things is because if people just want to believe what they want to believe, identify as whatever they want to identify, Christian, Catholic, Jew, I could care less. What I have a problem with some of these things is when they are beholden, and I mean people, all of us for that matter, this applies to me just as much as anybody else with my own beliefs, is that if my beliefs affect the way that I vote, or affect the way that I treat gay people or transgender people or people of a different color, or my children or my wife or my neighbor, or whatever, the people who live in a different country, you know what I mean? Am I dropping bombs on people? If my worldview is so fragile or so twisted, and my way of rationalizing things is so broken, that's the harm that I see that coming from this. I could care less if he thinks he can fill up his 10% of his bathtub and not fill up the whole thing at the same time equally. If that's what he thinks is possible, more power to him. But at the end of the day, how are you guys letting that affect the way that you interact with other people? That's the only reason I argue against this stuff.
Well, your morality, your views on morality and things like that is going to affect how you interpret the actions of other people, and thus how you should to interact with them. So, like, I think we can all agree on that. If we have a view of morality, whatever it is, there's going to be people doing immoral things. They have to be basically inhibited or stopped in some way. Okay, so we just have to agree on what the limits of morality are, what exactly is moral. But everyone has a view of morality, and everyone wants their view of morality to be enforced on the rest of society. So that's why it's important to get these questions right, in my opinion. So everyone's viewpoint is going to basically determine. See, I see the liberals and the skeptics, they have outgroups too, and that they mistreat. So I see that a lot of skeptics channel, they will make fun of and mock the deeply held beliefs of religious people. And they don't really seem to, and not just talking about anyone in Pacific, but I think this is quite clear that when I see a lot of atheist channels, they don't care if they hurt the feelings of Christians, because Christians are a bunch of bozos who believe in this, and they're bad people, they're hateful and all that. So skeptics also can treat people disrespectfully and things like that, because, and from their viewpoint, maybe they're right. Maybe the Christians deserve to be mocked. But again, whatever you view as moral, there's going to be people who fall outside of that, and you're going to basically view them as a threat. So I don't think that's specific to religious people at all. This is a good question. Do you agree that if someone denies free will, they must also deny rationality, since the two are? Yeah, I do actually believe that. If you don't have free will, it means you can't choose your beliefs. Your beliefs are based on chemical interactions in your brain, which have no concern about what's true and what isn't true. So if you lose free will, you lose the ability to think rationally. So I agree with that. I think that's a good point. I wanted to.
Well, I think if I could can I chime in on that, because I think I agree with everything that that you. Can you put the question back up just so I don't misquote it?
Yeah.
Someone denies free will, they must also. Yes, I do agree that you're denying rationality. You're also denying any accountability. Where I disconnect from A's is he said something about if you think it's only chemicals firing in your brain, then it's not free will. I don't understand where he came up with that, because all of our free will is based on a choice, and a choice is based on a decision, which is a firing of chemicals of the neurons in the brain. In my opinion, that's where all our decision making comes from, is the brain. But
Well,
other than that, I think we agree.
well, you can't have all of your thoughts in your mind, the products of it being produced by chemical interactions, and also have a choice in what you do. Because you have to think about it, the chemicals in your brain, they're just behaving according to laws of physics. They're not trying to produce a right choice. They're just producing thoughts as the laws of physics necessitate. So they're not going to produce a choice that corresponds to necessarily what's true or what's good or what's even best for your survival. They're just going to produce whatever thought is that's acquired by those interactions at that time. So you can't have free will if all of the products of our mind are a production of brain activity.
Well, of course you can. Of course you can. Just because there are neurons firing doesn't mean that you don't continually think and process the information and then deal with that, as a process. It's a whole process.
Well, the neuron, I have to understand, you're importing the idea of the neurons being actually producing something that has substance. Your theory of mind, I think it needs to be developed. You have to realize if a mind is, according to quote science, if you want to call it that, the materialistic paradigm, the mind is what's called an epiphenomenon of brain activity. Okay, this is one area where the materialist is sorely lacking. So if it's an epiphenomenon, thoughts actually have no ability to affect change in the physical world on their own. They just are the products of brain activity. They don't actually affect the brain. They don't actually guide the brain. They don't control the brain. They're just being produced by the brain. So the neurons themselves are composed of
Well,
atoms. The atoms.
that's a straw man, because it's not the thoughts. You're right. The thoughts can't produce anything. I can think about the color red. I'm not producing the color red. The thoughts affect the decision that we're making, which is a thought, and that decision causes me to send electrical signals to my arms and legs, and cause them to act based on my thoughts. It's all physical. It's all
No,
material. There's no
it's not. Okay,
neuroscientists deny the idea that there's a mind separate from the brain. The scientific
right,
community does not agree.
right. Yeah, there's
Yeah.
only okay. So if there's no mind separate from the brain, then you can't have thoughts affecting the brain from outside of it. Okay, so the idea of a conscious experiments is just kind of what's called an epiphenomenon of the brain. It's just an electrical spark that creates this experience, but it has no power in and of itself. So it can't actually engage in
No,
this sort of
again,
like
the power comes from what we do with the thought. That's where the power
it,
comes from. That's how we
the
actuate. That's how the thought is actuated.
the thought itself doesn't have any power because it is purely a product. It is basically the only thing that really exists at the end of the day is the physical matter itself. So the physical matter in our brain can't be affected by the thought because the thought isn't a real thing. It has no power to do anything. You can't have like this like bubble of thought above your head that realizes something and then feeds itself back into the brain to make it do what it thinks is right. This is why the actual materialistic concept of the mind makes no sense because it's so contrary to what we actually experience and observe, which is that thoughts have real power. But you have to realize that from a materialist perspective, thoughts actually can't have any power in and of themselves.
Sure, they can. Just like words can have power. Words aren't a thing. So if somebody yells fire, that power that's in that word and that term is going to cause me to run out my building or to grab a fire hose or something. The word fire doesn't do anything other than the action that it brings about, just like a thought brings about an action.
Okay, so does a thought have a physical substance? Let me ask you that.
No, of course not. Neither does a word.
Okay,
It's
so
just
what is
it's something that
the mechanism?
brings.
What is the mechanism by which the thought affects a physical disturbance in the brain or a physical reaction in the brain that causes it to do something if it doesn't have
It
any
is a
actual?
it is an epiphenomenon, like you said. It's a result of something. So the firing of the neuron,
Right.
the way our brains work, it produces thoughts and images. Those
Yeah,
images
but
aren't real.
but the thoughts are just a byproduct of chemical activity. They can't for your thoughts to actually be able to control you. They have to have real power to change the chemistry of your brain to do something like move your arm. But thoughts can't do that in your world because they don't have any substance. There's no physical there's nothing physical, and there's no law acting upon something physical to change the material in your brain to do something that makes sense. You see what I'm saying? The thought isn't real. It doesn't actually exist. So it can't actually exert power in the world like an electrical charge or something would. You have to realize that the thought is purely like, it's like a shadow almost. A shadow, when it falls on the ground, it doesn't actually affect the ground. It's not actually a real thing. It's just a byproduct that there not being enough light there to have.
Well, that's exactly why it affects. That's why it affects something, because it
well, so
stops
is your shadow,
photons.
let me ask you this:
It stops
your shadow
photons from touching the ground.
So if there's like a little leaf on the ground and your shadow moves over it, does it move the leaf?
It stops the photons from reaching the leaf.
I didn't ask you that. Does the shadow move the leaf? The shadow can't move the leaf, right?
Of course not.
Okay, so just in the same way, your thoughts can't actually do your thoughts. Your shadow isn't actually a substantial thing. There's not like a shadow that's exerting force on a leaf that's moving things.
Can the word fire make you run out? Can the word fire in and of itself make you run out of a building?
Well, no, it can't.
Of course,
but
but
again,
you run out of the building when you hear the word fire.
right? Because you actually have real thoughts. Thoughts have a real substance, and there actually is something in your mind that controls your brain. In your worldview, that's impossible. And
But the word fire isn't. The word fire isn't a thing.
It is something that our mind interprets and then utilizes to make a decision that has. You see, in your worldview, decisions can't actually. So here's the problem, though, for your worldview. You can't say that everything is determined by the chemicals in your brain and then say there's this ethereal thought thing that can somehow change the laws of physics to do something other than they were going to do beforehand. It's like saying a creek can have a thought that makes it flow upstream. It's like, no, a creek's just going to flow downstream because of the laws of physics govern the motion.
Does a creek have a brain?
Doesn't matter if it has a brain. It's all physical matter. The physical matter is all that really exists in your worldview. So it doesn't have a. It doesn't have a distinct
difference between. There's a distinct difference between how proteins are organized, and you guys did the whole biology thing. But even an idiot like me knows that there's a distinct difference between organisms, animate things, inanimate things. I mean, this is a massive straw man.
Fundamentally, no, there isn't.
There's no difference. The arrangement of molecules and proteins is no different. Everything is the same. That doesn't even make sense.
Only the arrangement of the particles, but there's no increased capacity to defy the laws of physics. If the particles are in the shape of a stream, they'll act as a stream. If the particles are in the shape of an organism, they're still going to follow the laws of physics. You can't defy the laws of physics just because you're in a different configuration. That's why.
Well, I didn't say you could defy the laws of physics. I never implied that. That's not what.
So, for free will to exist, you actually do have to be able to move against the laws of physics. You have to be able to, your physical body has to be able to go one way or the other depending on your actual decision. You have to be able to decide something, and it moves your body to the left or to the right. So, or it has to be able to. You basically have to generate the ability to form your own thoughts apart from the deterministic laws of nature, because if the laws of nature are determining all your mental activity, well, then your mental activity is going to be totally governed by things outside of your control. That's going to include your rational faculties. So you can't have rationality. He's right. You can't have rationality and everything be determined by laws of physics. You just can't.
But the laws of nature do dictate that you could do things outside of your mental control. So try to make yourself stop breathing, for example. It won't happen. You won't die from suffocation by forcing yourself to stop breathing mentally.
Right, because we have free will, which violates the idea that everything is behaving deterministically according to laws of nature. Right. So you have to realize that to get rationality, you have to have free will, and for free will to exist, the materialistic concept of mind can't be true. Philosophically, it's refuted if you accept that rational thinking is a possibility. Now you can.
Okay, let me try another. Do you mind if I try another approach with this to see if I can help you understand? Okay, so think about it not so much as thoughts. Now think about how emotions. Do emotions cause a firing of the brain? Are emotions part of your will, your free will, which is specifically free will is talking about determination of processing information, right?
Are you talking
what do you,
about from a Are you talking about from a materialistic perspective or my perspective, which I believe is true? So I have a
your
dualist view.
perspective? How do emotions, which we would
Yeah.
define as a
So
right, how is
emotions are
that
things
causing
that
you to love someone or hate someone or to buy someone flowers, for example? So if I love my wife, I'm going to buy her flowers, right? So
right.
how is emotion a thing?
Well, the mind is a thing, and emotions are basically concepts or feelings generated in the mind. So the mind has a real substance. It's a real thing that has a real substance or power to that is my actual self. It actually my mind is supreme over my body. My mind is the thing that's controlling my body, but my body is just a robot controlled by my mind, my physical body. So the mind to me is preeminent above the physical body. But in materialism, you actually can't have a mind. You can't have a mind with substance and and power, force, will, and things like that. You really have to just view it as a physical lump of matter that is producing some like an epiphenomenon of the mind in the brain by brain activity. But the mind, the thoughts it produces, the emotions it produces, can't actually then engage in a feedback loop where they then affect the physical matter itself. They can only be a product of
Why
the
not?
physical matter.
Why can't they? Why can't they engage in a feedback loop? Why can't
Because there's no well according to materialism. Oh wait, you're kind of echoing now a little bit. I don't know why.
My phone is ringing. Speaking of my beautiful wife, she heard me talking about buying her flowers. She's.
Oh,
Let me try and. Sorry about that. Do this.
are you back?
See, this is how we know transcendental things are a thing, because my wife, she felt that I was talking about flowers, and she's like, I better call him and tell him I don't want roses, I want carnations. But
All right, I want to take a hear this thing, objective. I want to take a slight detour just for a second because there was something you brought up earlier.
yeah,
I
we
just
don't
want to
need
put
to.
it to
Yeah,
bed.
yeah, we don't need to grind this
Okay.
out. And I think I
Well, I
honestly
want
feel like we're probably at an impasse with this.
Well, we're at an impasse, but I want to show you how you're wrong because when you realize you're wrong, you're going to realize that materialism fails and you can't have rational thought, or you're just going to have to die in rational thought, which I don't think you want to do. But you were asking me earlier about prophecy. So here's a definition of prophecy. This is the freedictionary.com. Prophecy is to speak as a prophet. Okay, that's not very helpful. To foretell future events. Okay, that's kind of what you were talking about. Now, there are different definitions here. We have a prediction. Again, that's what you were talking about. Or the inspired utterance of a prophet. That's kind of what I was talking about. If you come down
It doesn't
here,
say okay.
if
It
you come
doesn't
down
say
here,
or. It doesn't say or. It's a clarification on what prediction is, and it refers
uh,
that adjective to the noun. But go ahead.
okay, that's correct. Correct. So again, you come down here a little bit further, and it says to reveal by divine inspiration. That's basically exactly what I was saying
Oh, I'm sorry.
earlier.
I meant verb, but not adjective. Go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, no,
Whatever.
yeah. So there are multiple definitions of prophecy, prophet. One of them is what you were saying: to predict the future with certainty, to prefigure to shadow. Okay, those are a couple very important definitions. But also, there's just a general definition of to reveal by divine inspiration, which is kind of what I was saying. And we hear a verb intransitive: to reveal the will or message of God, exactly what I said. To speak or write as a prophet, exactly what I said. And then you have your definition as well: to predict future events and make predictions. So there are kind of multiple definitions of what prophecy and being a prophet is. There is a general idea of being a prophet, which is just to speak God's will, and there's the more nuanced or more specific idea of predicting the future, which is a prophecy. So there's different like kind of ways of looking at it. But here's the thing. All right,
Yeah, I agree. I agree with you 100%. I agree with you 100%. But that's why you have to look at the context. Is there a future context, or is there a present context, or is there a past context? Because
right.
by that definition, you could prophesy about the past, which obviously doesn't really make any sense linguistically with how we would use the term. How am I prophesying about the past? You know what I
Right.
mean?
So yeah. So I will just say that there's a semantic domain to the word prophecy. It can be defined as what you're saying, which is a prediction about the future, or it can just be speaking the will of God. So I just wanted to kind of put that to bed. But yeah, maybe this is an area where, when it comes to, I just wanted to kind of lay that out. That's done and dusted. I don't need to go back to that. Going back to the idea of theory of mind, what you're doing. Let me try and again, we can't go for too much longer. I kind of have to shut things down pretty
Yeah,
soon here,
my wife
unfortunately. How about
my wife might actually have
yeah?
muted me. I shouldn't. So I
Right. All
probably
right.
should. Let's do our
Yeah. Let's
let's do our
close
closing
things down.
statements.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's do closing statements. Say whatever you think is on your mind. And make an argument, make a case, or anything at all, and then like
Well,
you guys do.
one thing I want to put out there. Are you, obviously, I know you are, but I'm just going to ask out of whatever. You are well aware, I'm sure, that there is a concept about omnipresence, omniscience, and omnipotence called the triomni qualities of God, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
and you're well aware that this is Christian doctrine and that Christians have talked about this over thousands of years, right?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, and I'm not trying to set you up to be an idiot because you and I are both well aware of this. Well, Dirty Varmint attacked me the other day, calling me a liar because I mentioned this, and he says no Christian has ever taught about these omni properties. It's just a straw man that a liar like me would bring up because it's so easy to refute. Now, it is easy to refute these omni properties. He's not wrong about that, but I certainly am not lying about that. And this guy has been trolling me basically, talking about silly stuff like that. And I took a screenshot of it. So if he's saying, "Oh, I never said that," I've got the receipts of his comment because we did this happen in the chat section. So I just want to put it out there that if Dirty Varmint wants to come on and actually debate me about global flood, biblical inerrancy, you name it, brother, anything that you actually want to, go ahead and have a debate on, I have absolutely no problem. And if A's doesn't want to host it, I've got a friend who said he would platform me for any kind of debate I want. I'd be more than happy to go ahead and cook you. All right. That would be great. So anytime you want, brother, you know what I mean? No disrespect to you. I'm not trying to just call you out like this, but it is what it is. If you're going to say something like that and put it out there, at this point, if you're going to troll around with me, I'm going to call you out right here and right now on this live. Let's debate. And any topic you want. We could do morality. We could do global flood. We could do biblical inerrancy. I mean, literally, I don't care. We could debate about whether Snoopy was Charlie Brown's dog if you want to. You just let me know. A's, it's always a pleasure to be on your channel. I look forward to talking to you again. Okay, brother?
Well, thanks for being here, Objective. All right. That was an interesting conversation. Most of the stuff that was being discussed earlier, I was kind of just on the sidelines about when Objective and Truth and Telos Ministries were going back and forth on morality. To be honest, I wasn't agreeing much with either one of them, even though I'm not trying to disrespect Truth and Telos Ministries. I don't really subscribe to his view of Christianity. I think he makes a lot of mistakes. I'm not trying to disrespect him at all. I think that the way he approaches the Bible, where he kind of says he believes it, but then if you ask him about things it says, he completely reinterprets it according to his own viewpoint. I don't know. It's kind of hard to deal with that. And also the kind of ideas that he gets from it, there's the idea that he started off trying to argue about their morality being a real thing, but then he also says that the Bible says that God predestines everyone to do everything they do. So how do you have moral agents without moral autonomy? If God's ordaining people do the things that people do and determining it, then they can't be moral agent. It can't be seen as moral, because to be moral, you have to be able to make a choice between one thing or the other. And another other things Predator said, I don't even get into everything, but I was disagreeing a lot of it. I was agreeing with some stuff, but just with anyone, agreeing with a few things he said. But for the most part, I was just letting Objective and Truth and Telos kind of have that conversation. We had no conversation about communism earlier and its relationship and its kind of similarities to Christianity. I think that was a pretty interesting conversation. I was actually kind of hoping to continue that for longer than it went, but more people join and things get disorganized. There is no true Scotsman except for me and A's philosophy, of course. I like that, Dirty Varmint. Yep. We're the only ones, Dirty. We're the only ones out there. Even though I do disagree with Dirty on a couple things too, but we won't mention that right now. The theory of mind was actually also a really interesting conversation. For me, I really think it's extremely obvious that, again, no disrespect to anybody, but to believe that, let's go back to the comment. Let's see if we can find it again. Let's see if we can find it from Earth. Thank you, Earth. Do you agree that if someone denies free will, they must also deny rationality, since the two are two sides of the same coin? Yeah, so the materialists, the skeptics, they will say all of our thoughts are basically determined by brain activity. But then they will also come around and say that we can somehow choose our thoughts, and our thoughts can have real impact on the matter in our brain. What? You can't have rationality without free will. So they'll deny you have free will. They'll deny you have the ability to basically develop your own thoughts, because your thoughts are the product of chemical activities in your brain. And the chemicals in your brain, the molecules in your brain aren't generating thoughts based on what's good for the configuration they're in, namely a physical organism. No, they're just moving around in your brain. They don't see anything. They're just bumping around. They have no awareness of what they're doing, how they're interacting with other molecules in their brain. Just like the molecules in a puddle have no idea of how they're interacting with other. They don't care if they're in the shape of a puddle, or half of a puddle, or a clod of mud or dirt or stone, or in a living organism. Yeah, they're just different configurations of atoms that are moving around in space. Some are in the shape of a stream, some are in the shape of a rock, some are in the shape of a tree, some are in the shape of a brain. And it turns out somehow that when molecules are in the shape of a brain, they just happen to produce thoughts, according to this worldview. They produce a mind somehow. So if you're in a stream, there's no mind. But if molecules somehow over time form them in the shape of a brain, all of a sudden somehow the laws of nature determine that there's thoughts are produced in these interactions. Okay, that's interesting. To me, it makes more sense to say the thought is fundamental, the mind is fundamental, and it's interacting with the brain. But anyways, okay, so the molecules form into a brain, and they're interacting with each other, they're generating electricity, and thoughts are produced. Okay, the thoughts are just an epiphenomenon. The thought isn't a real thing, just like your shadow isn't technically a real thing. Your shadow isn't like has a force that's exerting a force on the ground when you walk by. When your shadow goes over, a leaf, it doesn't move the leaf, because your shadow isn't a real thing. It's just a difference in the shade of light, okay, the amount of light that's in that place. So your shadow can't actually do anything. The same thing, the shadow is an epiphenomenon of you blocking some light. Okay, your mind is an epiphenomenon of chemical interaction. Your brain doesn't have any existence on its own, so it can't then basically turn around and determine what the chemicals in your brain are doing. It can't turn around and actually exert a force on the chemicals in your brain that make it move the legs or the arms or anything like that. It's just kind of something that exists in the ether that disappears when the chemicals stop interacting with each other. So you can't actually have thoughts that determine anything, that do anything. You can't make choices that have actual effect on the physical matter of this world. This is just very, very obvious, very basic. But the problem is, it clearly conflicts with our direct experience. We clearly our thoughts do have an experience, so they have to kind of hold this cognitive dissonance where our thoughts are produced by our mind, are the chemicals in our brain, but then somehow our thoughts are real things that can actually somehow exert force on the chemicals in our brain as well, even though the thought doesn't have any physical matter to it. It can't exert a force because it's not physical. Non-physical things can't exert a force on anything around them. You're defying the laws of physics at that point. You're defying basically logic itself. The molecules in your brain, they don't care if they make the right decision. Okay, they don't care that if you step in the fire, you'll get burned. All right. When you throw a little piece of paper in the fire, it just burns up. It doesn't feel pain. Now, pain is an epiphenomenon in itself. So you'll say, oh, you feel pain, you run away. Well, the molecules don't really care if they're feeling pain, if they're changing their substance, chemical interactions and all that. They don't. So you can't have the molecules in your brain actually making good decisions, because they don't care to make good decisions. They're molecules. They aren't aware of anything. A hydrogen atom doesn't have an awareness of what's going on around it. Can't see anything. Can't make a decision. Oh, it's just a hydrogen molecule. It's not in a brain. Okay, well, what's your brain? Collection of hydrogen molecules, carbon atoms, oxygen atoms, nitrogen atoms. None of these things in themselves has awareness. Can't see anything. They don't care if they're They don't even know they're nitrogen atoms. Molecules, oxygen molecules, O2, H2O, water. H2O molecule just flows down the stream, flows into the lava, flows into whatever. Yeah, so the idea that these chemicals in the brain actually care about making good choices, it's silly. It's nonsensical. But we know it's false because it doesn't correspond to the reality we observe. So they're holding this really nonsensical view of worldview, materialism, when it's just clearly falsified by observations of reality. And we can have that conversation later. I'll try try to show them how it doesn't make sense, how they're living in a contradiction. They got to go. Either they can accept materialism and deny rationality, or they can accept mind-brain dualism and free will and all these things that violate the laws of physics, and then accept rationality as well. But they're going to have to deny. They can't have both. They're going to have to think about this. Maybe he hasn't thought about this enough to realize that there's a logical contradiction in his viewpoint. There's a contradiction in how it all works. All right, so that's a big problem for them. All right, we're going to shut down the stream. I think I pretty much highlighted everything that was interesting to me. Please like and subscribe. Again, if you thought this conversation was interesting, because I plan on hosting more of them and more content, go look at my video based on previous conversation about evolution on my Substack as well. Go on my channel, look at my Substack. I wrote an article about mitochondria. Do they exist independently? And also there's some developments that are coming down the pipe, and I'll talk about them a little bit. Maybe I won't know. No, I'll talk about them later. About debates that I'm going to be involved in. Oh, that sounds interesting. Yep, I've been invited to debate, so we will see that eventually. And yeah, I'll be on camera and everything, so that should be interesting. Anyways, I'll talk to y'all later. God bless.